millennials, they want it, you have to think their way or they just don't like you and you're the devil and they hate you and everything else. So, especially when you're doing Christianity and Christianity, there's a lot of Christians that, and famous Christians that have given Christianity a bad rap. I
Yep.
mean, it's just, that's facts. They do. And so it's really hard for me to be able to do YouTube full time. Like I haven't even got to the point where I can get monetized yet. Like,
Oh wow. Yeah.
but then again, like I said, I really don't put out like a crud load of videos.
Yeah. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time. But yeah, I'm trying to build an organization to do exactly that. Have both Christians and atheists be able to do debates full time. So hopefully we'll be able to start that up pretty soon. Is there like right now your video is pretty grainy? Do you have a higher resolution, or is it maybe just in the settings?
Uh, Now it's shooting on 4K on my side. It should be.
Yeah, it might be in the settings of this website. If you go to video, like the gear in the top right, video,
Let's see it. Hold on.
Yeah, HD video, prefer HD video. Maybe that's mine. Yeah.
Settings. Video. HD video. Is that any better?
A little bit, I think.
I was able to click on the HD video.
Now it's definitely better now, for sure, 100%.
Okay, good.
I had to process a bit, but now it's better.
Sure wish these headphones would go louder. I'm kind of deaf. The military made me deaf, and then of course working in the oil field doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, now you're frozen. That's weird.
Is it still freezing?
Yeah, like your picture's frozen. I can still hear you fine though.
Huh.
Let me try to refresh on my end. All right, now I can see you.
Is that better?
Yes.
I
All
can
right.
dance if you want me to. I'm not a good
Yes,
dancer. But I
yes,
can
we
dance.
must now have dancing. What kind of dancing? All right, everything looks good on my end. I'm live. People in the audience say they can hear us fine. We are good to go. So, Richard, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
My name is Richard Long. I've been a Christian for quite some time now. Christian apologist, probably going on about 5 years. I got a degree in theology from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I have certificates from Biola University in apologetics. And I just do a lot of research, a lot of studying. And honestly, I'm just in pursuit of the truth on whatever that might be. And for me, I believe it to be God, a Christian God specifically, but we'll talk about that later. And I just wrote a book, and hopefully it should be coming out soon. So hopefully everybody can look for it. It's called Stand for God. Will the defendant please ride? Evidence for God's existence. And that's really it about me. I have a podcast named The Christian Apologist. I have a YouTube channel named The Christian Apologist. And you can usually catch either one or both at the same time. And I'm pretty much everywhere on any major podcasting network.
Awesome. I am an atheist. I run an atheist YouTube channel where all of my viewers are right now. And by atheist, I mean, I believe that everything is better explained by naturalism. I think that all the arguments and evidence more point to a naturalistic conclusion. So could you tell me some of the evidence and reasons you believe that do indicate a God?
The three biggest things I can give is like the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. And I'm sure y'all have heard most of those already. And so it's basically just going to be like beating a dead horse. But those are the three reasons I do believe in a God. And of course, the biggest one for me is the cosmological argument or the contingency argument, however you want to refer to it as.
Cool. So the cosmological argument states that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The universe has a cause. But why think that cause is a God and not just another natural law of physics or something we just haven't discovered yet?
And it could be, but we don't know that yet. And for what we do know from the science that we do have is that nature wasn't here for this to begin. So for it to be naturalism to me, that means that something would have to have been here. But yet, most philosophers and cosmologists sit there and say that there was literally nothing before the Big Bang. There was no thing. And so, for something to come out of nothing, to me, that means that something has to exist outside of the time, the space, the material for it to create something in to time, space, and material.
You say that most philosophers and physicists say there was nothing. As far as I know, like none of them say that. Like the I think the consensus is that there was always a something that preceded that. Like Lawrence Krauss wrote his book Something from Nothing, which was a misrepresentation. Like even when he's been asked about it, it was never a literal philosophical nothing. Every physicist, I think, in every physicist model says there was a natural thing before the Big Bang. I don't think there's any evidence that shows nature began to exist. It's only certain parts of nature that began to exist at the Big Bang.
Right. And even Stephen Hawking says that, I mean, he said that nothing was here before. But then, of course, he goes on to say that, he believed there was a quantum vacuum.
Yep.
But to me, if you're going to sit there and say there's a quantum vacuum, then you can't say there's nothing. Because if there's nothing, then that's literally no thing. And so to sit there and say there's a quantum vacuum that created all of this, well, first off, you got to have proof of that quantum vacuum, of course. And if you don't have proof, but that's your theory, then you can't claim that there was nothing. You have to say that there was something.
All right,
And
I totally agree. I think that in physics, the way they use nothing is very different. Because in academic fields, the way they use language is oftentimes different from the way they used in colloquially in everyday language. So, like atom, the literal Latin meaning of the word atom is the smallest constituent part, but atoms in physics are actually a combination of protons and electrons and neutrons and things. And so, in physics, nothing means none of the stuff that we can empirically know about today, but it doesn't mean a literal philosophical nothing. It just means none of the known kinds of stuff. And so I totally agree. I think it's a weird use of language that doesn't really map onto what most people understand by nothing. But when they do say nothing, like Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss, what they mean is just none of the empirically verified stuff. That's it. And so the Big Bang, all it does is show that there was something else we don't know about before the Big Bang, but none of it says that all of nature began to exist. It's just our known stuff began to exist. And so I don't think it's reasonable to conclude that because of the evidence of the Big Bang that something non-natural must exist. It could just be, I think all of the evidence indicates is most likely just a natural thing.
Right. But if something, and to me though, is if something begins to exist, then something has to start that beginning. It's not going to just begin on its own. It's not going to just start on its own. Something has to begin it. Even if you're right, even if we do discover later on in the future that there was something, a quantum vacuum, there was something out there, something had to have started all of it to begin. And it's like, and I'm sure you've heard this many times and believe many different ways, but it's the same thing as if saying, you find a laptop or a cell phone sitting on a beach and nobody's around. We don't assume that, nothing put that there. We assume that somebody put that there. And so, to me, it's like something as big as the universe and as grand as the universe and as fine-tuned as the universe is, something had to have started it.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think that my explanation is that there is a necessary natural thing that doesn't have a mind. Like I think it's probably a quantum field of some kind, and interactions in that quantum field produced the universe. And that seems to me to be a better explanation than a god. Why would you prefer a god than to like quantum fields?
Because I believe it had to be an intelligent mind to be able to make everything into a fine tuning as the earth is. For instance, you can go into like all the details of, like all the stars in our universe are equal to all the sands of the grains of the earth times 100,000. And without those stars being there, the gravitational forces wouldn't be right for us to exist. And the tilt of the earth, if it wasn't exactly the way it was, we never would have existed. Or if Jupiter wasn't where it was, we probably would already been destroyed by now because it's a quantum vacuum for us. Not a quantum vacuum, but a space vacuum, basically. For all the debris that's getting flown around at us.
Asteroids, yeah.
And so and I just think with those kinds of fine tuning, I just don't. see how it could possibly be an accident. I don't see how it could just be nature just did that. To me, nature can say what is, but it can't say what ought to have been. It can't tell us that, but a mind can. And so for this to have happened the way it is, and to know that, through the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running out of entropy, it's going to run out of energy, and we're all going to go into heat death someday, then that means that it had to have started, and there's going to be an end at some point. So I just think that it was all put together, not by an accident. I just don't see how accidents can create that.
So you mentioned a lot of the constants of like the Earth, the tilt, and the Jupiter and things like that, but that seems to be explained by the fact that there are trillions of different solar systems, and so necessarily a lot of them are going to have the correct conditions for life. And NASA's found 5,000 within our nearby galaxies, so that seems to be not finely tuned. That seems to be random chance. Um, would you disagree on that one?
I don't think it's random chance. I do think, and a lot of people, and might be where you're going with what you're saying, it might not be, but a lot of people say, well, why would God put us here and not on another galaxy and on one of these other planets and everything else? And to me, I think the vastness of the universe and the different galaxies is just to show the power and the largeness, if you will, of God. Because, if the universe was to stop at our clouds, we wouldn't think like God was that big. It's like, wow, okay, that's great, bud. But then when you see the massive of the universe and all these other galaxies, I think it just shows his massiveness, his awesomeness.
Well, I'm trying to like make the connection between the fine tuning leads to a god. So like if we see a bunch of dice and uh, say we have a bunch of 100 sided dice and 1% of them landed ones. I mean, we wouldn't call that fine tuning. It's just chance because there's a random, based on the way the dice works, there's a random chance that 1% of them are going to land ones. And so if we look at the universe and we say the tilt of the earth is this much, Jupiter is there, and the gravitational balancing is all like this, we can, at the solar system level, we can say, well, oh, that's just like a dice landing one. There's a whole bunch of solar systems like that, and most of them don't, because most of them aren't ones. They're mostly other numbers, because there's more other numbers. Right. But there is a certain percent of them that are ones, and it's exactly what we would expect by chance. So just related to the Earth's constants, it seems like that's not finely tuned. That's just chance stuff. Why would you conclude that the Earth's constants are finely tuned as opposed to like the universe constants themselves? That would be a different argument. But just the relationship of the Earth in the solar system seems to be fully explained by chance because there's lots of different solar systems.
To me, okay, so the easiest way for me to think of this is using your dice analogy. You're saying, like if you had a dice that had 100 different heads, and if I was to say I'm going to throw out a 5 and it landed on a 5, that's a pretty good chance. I'll probably play the lottery, but that's a pretty good chance if it actually landed on that 5. But to me, it's like taking like 5 or 6 dices and rolling all 5s a certain amount of times in a row. That's no longer chance. It's either I'm cheating or something else is involved. And the reason I say like 5 dice is because there's all different types of fine tuning arguments that we could go into with, the way the world is so that we could exist here today. And so if you just took 5 of those and yet rolled them and kept rolling them and rolling them, I don't know how many times you're going to have to roll those to actually get them to all land on 5 at the exact same time. So that's why I say.
So, but imagine if you had billions and billions of dice and they're all being rolled at the same time. A whole bunch of them are going to land 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, right? That's going to happen pretty often. It's going to be rare, but if you have billions and billions of them occurring, it's not finely tuned when it lands 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It's just one of the many random chance incidents, right?
Right. But as far as we know, as of right now, Earth is the only place in all the galaxies that have human beings, that have sentient beings. And so it's not like all these other galaxies that have an Earth type atmosphere, Earth type planets, and that are in perfect condition and everything else actually have life on it, because they can't support life as far as we know right now. All I can do is go off of what science says right now. Now, of course, there's theories that, there could be life out there. They're looking for bacteria, they're looking for all kinds of things everywhere else, but nothing has supported life. They have no proof of any of this yet.
Well, they do have proof that there are millions of planets that have the exact same conditions that we do that would support life. We just obviously we can't go there yet. Obviously that's not, we don't have the technology to. But when you're talking about the fine tuning, that's the constants of our solar system that would allow for life, and we can prove scientifically that there are tons of those. NASA has an entire repository of just listing them because they've been searching for them for a lot. So if you're going to call that fine tuning, it seems more like, oh look, there's billions of dice, and this one landed 5555, and oh look, there's that one landed 5555, and that one landed 5555, and so it seems like that's all explained by chance. I don't know why you would conclude fine tuning there, because there are tons of planets that have the exact same conditions that ours do. Just because we only see sentient life on our planet doesn't mean there isn't sentient life out there. It just means we can't go there. So it seems strange to me if you're saying that the constants are fine tuned, yet we see the constants in lots of different places. Oh, did you refresh?
Yes, I got knocked off there. It's really, really windy here. So
Ah,
some of I don't even know if you can hear the wind, but
mm-mm.
it's like whistling really loud.
Oh wow.
So supposedly we have a cold front coming in. It's supposed to get down to like 60. That's our cold front.
Oh god.
So
It's just got my 8 inches of snow. Yeah. So as I was saying, it seems like we know for a fact scientifically that there are thousands and thousands of planets very close to us that have the exact same conditions that ours do. So it doesn't seem like you can say the conditions are finely tuned, because the conditions are random chance. It seems like, oh look, these happen all the time, all over the place at a certain percentage chance. So it doesn't seem like you can call that fine tuning, because we know for a fact it happens by random chance. Now, obviously we don't know any other sentient beings are out there because we can't actually go to them and check. But when we're talking about the fine tuning, we're talking about the conditions of the planet, not whether life is actually on it. So if the conditions of the planet can support life, and those conditions happen at a certain rate, like 5555 on dice, if you throw a million dice, then it doesn't seem like you can call that fine tuning.
well, see, I just think the universe itself is can't be a coincidence, and it can't be chance. For the simple fact of, when the Big Bang first started, and I'm sitting here looking at my PowerPoints here, but the universe was, when it was just 10/34th of a second old, a hundredth of a billionth of a trillionth of a second age, if it wouldn't have expanded at the rate that it did, then we wouldn't exist. Nothing would exist. Nothing would be here. And then for it to expand out the way it did, and to even have other galaxies that have planets like ours. But I'm not going to speak about the other planets and the other galaxies, because I don't know much about them. I'm not a cosmologist. I'm just going to be honest. I don't know much about them. I know about a lot of our universe, and what's in our little area, in our galaxy. And so for it to expand the way it did, and to land the way it did, and for all the planets to line up the way they have, and there's a lot of other things too, like and small things that I don't know if y'all learned them in school, but we did, about how, like an object in motion stays in motion until something changes its direction. And so pretty much a lot of the planets, spin in the same way, except for there's a couple of planets, there's a couple of moons that spin backwards. And to me, I understand, to me, it's the question of, why are they spinning backwards? And of course, my answer is because I believe God knew someday we were going to discover those, and we would question that. Why are they spinning backwards? I think God put out things there for us to try to figure out, so we would know that he exists. So scientists would know that he exists. But I mean, there's just so much about the expansion of the universe, when it first started out of the Big Bang. There's so much to do with, like I said, I know you say the fine tuning and you compare it to other galaxies and everything else, but for us here, that we know, as far as we know, this is the only place with life, sentient beings, then something to me had to have created that. I I can't get to a point where there's a chance. Like, I'm not going to sit there and I don't know if you know Frank Turek. You probably saw a lot of his videos.
I've met him.
I, I've liked his analogy about, the writing in the sand, you know, like Jason Loves Mary. We don't walk across that and think that just by chance it happened to be there. We don't think by chance a crab came out and did it. We know a person did it. We know an intelligent mind had to write that. And it also goes into like DNA and RNA and the genetic codes, and to know that with billions and billions of letters that have to line up exactly perfect for us to exist, I don't think that's a chance. Because, like I said, if you say something just Jason Loves Mary, we know a person did it. But yet, if you have a code written out billions of letters long that creates human life, then we say all of a sudden it was chance, it was evolution, it was. And I do believe in evolution, so we won't get into that. I do believe in evolution. I just believe in micro, not macro.
Okay, micro. I'll write that down too. So, as far as I know, the entire consensus of everyone in biology and physics is that the constants of our solar system are not finely tuned. There's nothing about those that are finely tuned. That's purely explained by chance. You brought up the universe. That's where the fine tuning question is usually debated, is like, is the original constants of the universe finely tuned? That's a valid question. But when it comes to the questions of our solar system and the tilt of the Earth and Jupiter and those kind of things, those have been proven scientifically definitely not finely tuned. That's absolutely 100%. Everybody in physics agrees. Chance. Same with the DNA and RNA thing, but that's a slightly different topic. So when it comes to the fine tuning of the universe, like the gravitational constant, the strong and weak electromagnetic force constant, those kinds of constants, if you want to say those are finely tuned, because usually when people say they're finely tuned, it means they could have been different. So like if you mentioned if the gravitational constant had changed in any little bit, then there would be no planets or galaxies or things. So there's only a very small range that it could be that would allow for planets and life and stuff. But that can be explained by them all being intertwined. So like we know that the weak and the electromagnetic force were thought to be two different forces, but at a high enough temperature, they combine to be the same force. It could be the case that all of the different forces are tied together such that if you change one, all the other ones will change proportionally because of some other law of nature that we haven't discovered yet, which ties them all together. If that was the case, then there would be no fine tuning. It would just be like that's the fundamental law, and there's just one law there. Why would you think that would be a less plausible explanation of the origin of the constants of nature than a god?
Because I believe with everything that there is, I can't get over the fact that something like that can just happen by chance, not just one chance. It's not like just one thing happened and that was a coincidence. That was a coincidence. That was a random chance. But everything lined up the way it has for us to be here today. And, with just human beings being able to be here and the universe being here. And, like you were talking about the laws. To me, laws don't create themselves. Laws are given by lawgivers. That's just me. I go back to Occam's razor. I take the least narrow road, and if that's the most reasonable explanation, then that's what I go with. I don't sit there and keep looking and digging, trying to say, well, if I keep digging and digging and digging, and some years into the future, we might find something else that could explain this and that. That's just me. Like I just follow with Occam's razor, and I sit there and I do research and I study and I see everything else, and I just don't see how it can be random. Like I don't see how the universe can be created and we have all these stars out there 30 trillion miles apart. And that's what's fun. And I mean, it's funny to me. And I agree with some of the other apologists that sit there and say, when scientists sit there and say, oh, we're going to explore space. No, you're not. You're not going to be able to. We can't barely even touch space. It's so far massive. Like we'll never even be able to make it to a star. I mean, we can make it to our sun, but obviously you're not going to go there. but we'll never be able to sit there and make it to a star 30 trillion miles away. I mean, the fastest we can even travel now is 20,000 miles an hour, approximately, which is about 5 miles per second. It would take you over 200,000 years to get to a star. We're not going to explore nothing. We can see things through telescopes, we can, go through, those kinds of things, but actually exploring, I mean, we can't even explore everything that's in the depth of the ocean yet. And yet they're trying to explore into space and everywhere else. So when they start talking about what they know about other galaxies and everything else, I mean, most of it is theories. And the reason I say that is because, like Frank Turk says all the time, science doesn't say anything, scientists do. So they can have their assumptions, but they don't know. And I mean, when they do know, and like I was telling you earlier, like when, if they do find, let's say, other planets, like you said, they have found on other galaxies that are pretty much just like Earth and fit for life on Earth. It doesn't disprove that there's a God to me. It actually helps to prove that there's a God, because what are the odds that you're going to go to another galaxy and find a place just like Earth, but yet there ain't no people there? I mean, why hasn't a life been created there? Why hasn't sentient beings been put there? Why hasn't evolution taken effect on other planets if these places do exist? And I'm not saying you're not lying. I'm going off of what, science is saying. I don't know. But I just think that with the fine tuning, the moral arguments, the contingency argument on why is there something rather than nothing? Why isn't there nothing here? Why are we here?
Well, so you mentioned Occam's razor. I totally agree in Occam's razor that we should postulate the least entities necessary in order to explain an explanation. But for me, that seems like the quantum field is the least. Quantum field seems to be the simplest explanation because it's the one that we have evidence for. It doesn't seem like to me like we have any evidence of a God. Like the difference between the physics theories and the God theory to me is that all of the physics theories are built on combinations of things that have been proven to not be imaginary. Like string theory, for example, to take one of the ones I don't like, but it's one of them, is a combination of two things in physics. One is vacuum energy states, which have been empirically demonstrated in the Casimir effect. And the other is early universe inflation, which was demonstrated in observations of the cosmic microwave background. It's called Guth's early universe inflation. Both of those things we know exist. And so if you combine them, you get string theory. We don't know string theory exists. String theory hasn't been proven, but all of the parts of string theory have been proven, whereas the parts of a God haven't been, like omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, or whichever parts you want to go with. Those don't have any evidence, whereas the parts of string theory all do have evidence. So it seems like the string theory hypothesis is a simpler one by Occam's razor than the God hypothesis.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I mean, I guess it's just it's one of those things where everybody's going to come up with their own beliefs. They're going to come up with their own theories, and they're going to come up with what makes sense to them. And so, like, in no way do I plan on sitting here having a conversation with you today, and by the end of it, you being like, "I'm a believer. I'm going with it. I'm a Christian." I don't know. I like to hear your thoughts. I like to hear your theories. I like to hear what atheists think, because if I'm wrong, I want to know the truth. That's all there's to it. I want to seek the truth, whether it proves me wrong or whether it proves me right. But have you ever heard of the astronomer Jastrow?
Maybe. How do you spell it?
Jastrow.
Sounds
So one of the
familiar.
things that he said, he's an atheist, but one of the things he said, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to get him out of quotes here. He says, astronomers now find that they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Now, he won't admit that there's God. He's not admitting that there's God. He's admitting that there's supernatural forces, which he can't explain, but he won't admit that there's God. But he is an atheist. And I think he's right. I think a lot of the astronomers and cosmologists and a lot of scientists who are atheists, I don't think they're out there just trying to prove that there is no God. I don't think most of them are out there with this, they're bent on trying to prove any of this. They're just trying to find the truth for themselves as well. And I think a lot of times, for me, that they end up saying things and discovering things that help prove that the possibility of there being a God.
So when he says supernatural, that means outside of the known natural stuff. So that doesn't mean literally.
Yes.
But
Right
that,
now, yeah, that's what I was saying.
but that could
He
just be
wasn't
a different kind of natural stuff. It doesn't mean that there's literally we've discovered this new ontology of like magic or whatever. It just means that there's the known stuff and then there's the unknown stuff. So
Right.
I don't think that really supports that there's a God there. It just shows that there is something outside of what we know, which
Right.
every physicist grants that for sure.
Yeah.
But the question I asked is like you brought up Occam's razor, and I totally agree with Occam's razor. I'm a big fan of that. But which is simpler? Which would Occam's razor choose? Would it choose something where all of the parts have been demonstrated, or something where there's new parts that haven't been demonstrated? Like for example, if we see a hoof print in the snow or something, we don't know what caused the hoof print in the snow. Is it simpler to say a horse did it because all the parts of the horses we know about, or is it simpler to say a unicorn did it because like magical horns, and we don't have any evidence of magical horns? It's simpler to go with the horse, right? Because if there's something that's made up of parts that we know about, that's a better explanation than something which we have no evidence of, right?
Right. No, I see. Yeah, I agree with you what you're saying with your analogy that you're using. But I think as far as Occam's razor being used as far as the beginning of the universe, I think it I think Occam's razor is easier to explain saying something was created out of nothing. So whatever created it had to be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, because space, time, and matter has to come into existence at the same time for anything to come into existence. So therefore, whatever it is, I mean, that's what we refer to as God. But I'm not saying Occam himself would have said, this is God. He just would have said there has to be a force out there that wanted to begin this and created this that lives outside these perimeters.
Well,
Instead of saying, well, let's just keep digging and digging and digging, trying to find something that can create something out of nothing. And when I say nothing, I literally mean no thing.
yeah. So the spaceless, timeless, immaterial part, I also agree with. But the consensus in physics is that like space and time are emergent from other natural stuff. So everyone agrees, yes, space and time not the fundamental thing. They came about at the Big Bang, but most physicists think that's another natural thing. That's the horse. So the way that ties into my analogy is that we see a hoof print in the snow, and that's the Big Bang. We don't know what caused this. And we think what caused it is probably a combination of the known stuff, like string theory, combinations of physics, of things like virtual particles. That seems to be like a simpler explanation than a God. A God would seem to be more like the unicorn, because there isn't any evidence of non-physical minds or omnipotence or omnipresence or omniscience or any of those properties. But there's lots and lots of evidence of like Casimir effects, cosmic microwave background radiation. Like the combination of those things seems to be the horse in this analogy. So it seems like saying that the quantum physics explains the horse print is the one Occam's razor would choose over the God.
Right. I see what you're saying. I think honestly, what I'm seeing here is that we'll never come to an agreement, because your idea of nothing and my idea of nothing are two totally different things. Your idea of nothing is that, there was something, we just don't know what it is. And my idea of nothing is there's literally no thing.
Well, you think there was God, right? So you would also agree there wasn't
Well,
ever.
I mean, God was there, but I'm talking about as far as the universe goes, there was nothing there before the universe, just God himself.
Well, how are those different? So in my view, there would be a thing before the universe, which is a quantum field, and in yours there was a thing before the universe, which was God.
Because the things that you were saying that existed had to be of some kind of material. It had to be some kind of material of some kind. Whether you go into the smallest quantum atoms you can find, it's something that it's a material of some kind. And so going back to Albert Einstein, for everything to exist, time, space, and matter have to come into existence at the exact same time. So for that matter to have been here, time would have already started. Space would have already been here. Because how are you going to have material if you don't have space? Or how are you going to have space if you didn't have time to put it in? So
Because
you got to have the three things all together.
well, no, remember, I agreed. It's not, there's timeless, spaceless, immaterial, other natural stuff that exists. So you don't need any of those things.
But you're going to have material.
No.
So so you literally believe that there was no thing that was here.
No, there's definitely something there. Like, there can be other kinds of things. Like, there's time is a kind of thing. It's a field. Space is a field. Material is a kind of interactions in those fields. And there can be other fields. We could give them different names, but those other fields can exist just fine without time, space, or matter. Time, space, and matter is just a single kind of stuff. There could be other kinds of stuff outside of that.
So give me an example of what could exist outside of time, space, and matter.
The amplituhedron, emergent space-time, Giulio Tononi's information theory, the holographic principle. There's lots of different theories out. String theory, strings. There's lots of possibilities.
But you still have to have something.
Yes,
there still has to be something there.
There's still something, just like God is a something. There is still something. It's just different than time, space, and matter. So time, space, and matter are a single kind of field. It's just like field A, and there could be a field B and a field C and a field D. Time, space, and matter is not literally all natural stuff. That's not what it means. It's just a kind of natural stuff.
But the things that you're listing off aren't personal agents.
Correct.
So how can they say we are going to create? I'm not saying they're talking to each other, obviously, but I'm saying, though, how are they going to come to a rationality of saying we are going to create a universe? We are going to do this.
Yeah, they're not
person.
Yeah, they don't have any rationality. There's no rationality
right.
there. They're just determined by forces. So they have a nature. They have a nature within themselves, and their nature determines them to do stuff.
Right, but to have nature, you have to have something there. And you're saying that the something that's there is not a personal force. It's not a personal agent.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to understand where you're at. So, and you believe that these personal agents,
non-personal,
collided, came together. Impersonal. Sorry.
Yes.
Impersonal agents came together at some point, and the Big Bang started.
Yes.
And so, I mean, if that makes sense to you, I mean, that's all I can say. I mean,
well, that's my question.
Like I said, everybody has their own. I mean, to me, that doesn't make sense at all. To me, there has to be some kind of personal agent to push things into order. Like, I've heard some of the apologetics say, like, how does an acorn know to grow to be an acorn? To be an oak tree? How does it know?
It doesn't.
Something has to tell it to go that way. Something has to move it that way. Like, we don't plant an acorn and think an apple tree could come out of it. Well, because something has to be moving it that way.
Well, like, it's like asking, how does a rock know to fall down a mountain? Well, it doesn't. There's a force that causes it to do it. It forces it to do it. So but
there's not a force that tells an acorn to become an oak tree.
There is actually. It's physics. Like the reason DNA works is by physical connections. It binds in a way, so it's literally forced to by physics. It doesn't choose to. But in the case of the quantum fields are kind of like a rock. Why did the quantum fields create the universe? Well, because they're determined to by their nature. Like, they have a way of being that they are, and so they're going to necessarily produce the universe. Like a rock is going to fall.
How did those get here?
They were necessary. They've never not existed outside of space and time.
So technically you believe in a God. You just don't believe in a theistic God.
Well, they wouldn't be a God because they don't have a mind.
Because you're saying they've always existed. They've always been here.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they've
So
always
I agree. There's a necessary thing that's always been there, but it doesn't have a mind. So in my view, it wouldn't, because I think a god has to have a mind of some kind, like a
Mhm.
consciousness. So these wouldn't be conscious, so they wouldn't qualify as a god, but they would have like the eternal quality.
and the power to create a universe.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, yeah. So my question would be is like, why would we prefer one with consciousness as opposed to like a quantum field?
Because it goes back to what I was saying. Like, I don't see how we can see just a simple sign of Jason loves Mary in the sand and then look at the universe and then look at human beings and sit there and say, but that was by chance. Jason loves Mary is not by chance, but the universe coming into existence, the fine tuning of the universe being here, human beings being here, the DNA being here, the morals, the morality being here, that can't, that's by chance, but not Jason loves Mary. Like, I just don't see that. Like, I can't, my mind just can't comprehend that.
Well,
Like, that's for me.
I agree with Jason Loves Mary because that's something that there is no natural force to produce. That's something that we know humans produce. Like if I saw a car or something, like obviously there's no like law of car that produces cars. It's humans that produce cars. But in the case of the origin of the universe, that could just be a product of laws like gravity or something. So I don't see the analogy between the laws of physics and Jason Loves Mary because Jason Loves Mary is a thing that we know for a fact is not produced by natural laws, whereas the origin of the universe could be produced by natural laws, like rocks falling or something. And so it seems like the origin of the universe could be more like rock fell down mountain, which is something we would totally say is natural, and not like the Jason Loves Mary, which is something we know isn't natural.
But the natural laws that you're speaking of, they're theories. That's what they think was out there. They don't know. Like, just like for me, I can't sit there and say I got 100% burden of proof God exists. Here it is. And it's the same thing with you, for instance. You can't sit there and say there's 100% proof. Scientists have proven 100%, no questions asked, this was out there before the creation of the universe. Neither one of us can do that. So it's just theories. Like, you can sit there and say what my belief in God is a theory. You could say that, and just I could turn around and say the same thing about yours. Well, yours is just theory as well.
Oh yeah.
So to me, it just, for me, the easiest burden of proof to follow is that something had to have created that. That's the easiest thing for me. The easiest way for me to understand that is that human, like, and we'll go to human beings real quick. There, to me, there's no proof of macroevolution. There's no proof that you can go. Now, I do believe in micro. I do believe, like, I could leave a Chihuahua here, and if he could live for 2 billion years, by the time I come back, I would have a wolf. I would have a German Shepherd. I would have all kinds of different dogs, but it would still be a dog. I don't believe that dog would be flying around and grow wings or grow gills and be in the water. I believe that it's going to stay within its kind. And so for human beings to be here and for the DNA sequence to be billions of letters long, and if one letter's off, like, it's over, it's done. And so I don't see how the Jason Loves Mary can be done by a human being, and we say we know that's a human being, but yet we take a billion letter sequence like in thousands of encyclopedias and sit there and say, oh, well, this was all put together by chance, by just random acts of chance. And then, of course, you got to get into, the epigenetic information and Darwin's black box and, yada, yada, yada. We don't have to travel down all that. But I can't come to grasp that that is by chance, because chance doesn't cause anything. Chance don't cause anything. Acts and forces cause things, but chance can't cause anything. You see what I'm saying? Like, when we
Sort
say
of.
this happens by chance, well, it didn't happen by chance. I mean, I know that's the word we use and we throw around, but chance actually doesn't cause anything.
Sort of. So, like in physics, there's a pole of physicist, Fundamental Attitudes in Physics, which states that randomness and chance are actually themselves forces, but that's a different topic. Yeah, so if you want to say that biology would be evidence why we should prefer a mind, that's fine. I'm happy to talk about that later. But just going with just the physics, if we're just looking at the physics, it seems like all of that can be better explained by quantum field. Quantum field is like the horse. It's a combination of things we know about which can explain all of the data, and so that's a simpler explanation than God. Just going with the physics. There doesn't seem to be anything in physics that indicates a mind. And if you want to say the biology could indicate a mind, that's fine too, and we can talk about that later. But it seems like if we're just looking at the physics, there isn't anything that indicates a mind. It's just this can all be explained by a quantum field as a simpler explanation than a God.
Hold on, I was trying to pull this up real quick.
Sure.
So I'm starting to try to understand, I guess, what you're talking about. And so I have here, from astrophysicist Alex Filipinko. I'll probably destroy that. Filipinko. He's from the University of Berkeley. He claims that with the laws of physics, you can get universes. That's what he creates. He says that in the very weird world of quantum mechanics, which describes action on a subatomic scale, random fluctuations can produce matter and energy out of nothingness. But he does go on to say that to get that started, and he's an atheist, but to get that started will require a divine spark. Now, when I say divine, like me and you were talking about earlier, I don't believe he means God. He's an atheist, but he's just saying something had to have started this. Something. And so, like I said, I still believe that there was literally nothing out there, and you're obviously, your nothing is there was something. There was a something nothing out there, if you will. And so, I mean, even if there was a something had to start it. Even if there were these, subatomic scale of quantum atoms out there, something had to get them started. Something had to combine them. Something had to, create this universe.
Right, but the thing that could have created them could be an eternal quantum field, which was never started. So like, that's pretty much all of the physicists. Like every physicist agrees that there's this eternal field of quantum somethingness that caused everything, and it was not started. Nothing started it. It's eternal.
And they have proven that there is this quantum something.
No, all of the parts have been proven. So the parts of the theory, like the things that are in the theory, like vacuum energy states, early universe inflation, those have been demonstrated, but the combination has not been. So the difference here between, like, God has never been proven either. So neither God or string theory have been proven. But the difference is that all of the parts of the string theory have been proven, whereas the parts of the God haven't been. So the string theory one is better, even though string theory, you're right, string theory is not proven, but all of the parts are. The vacuum energy in the Casimir effect has been proven. Early universe inflation, cosmic electric background proven. So all of the parts of the theory have been proven, even though the combination hasn't. So it seems to me because the parts have been proven, it's a better theory than a theory that the parts haven't been proven, like a God. So do you see why in physics that would be preferred? Like the parts at least are shown to exist. Therefore, this is a better theory than one the parts haven't been shown to exist?
I can understand why some people do believe that. Like, I'm not going to sit there and be blind to the fact of, like, I have no understanding of why they believe the way they believe. I do understand why they believe what they believe. But once again, to me, it's, to me, science, a lot of science now, like your string theory, is, well, give us enough time and we're going to prove it. Give us more time and we'll prove it. Give us more time. Give us more time. And to me, it's the same thing as, I don't even know who said this, and I stole it from them, but it's like saying, give me enough time and I'll prove that I gave birth to my mother. Like there's some things that you'll never be able to prove. Like I will never be able to sit there and 100% prove that God exists. And that's why I don't argue when people sit there and say, well, you need to prove God exists. I can't prove he exists. I can show evidence from what I see why God exists. Now you can follow that evidence and take it to where you want. You can either follow it and see where it leads, and you say, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I believe it. Or you can say, well, physicists say if we give them more time, the string theory is going to come to light, and this would explain everything. So I'm going to wait for this.
Well, I mean, I agree. We probably will never, really, science can't ever prove anything. It's always with some probabilities. But like right now, the evidence for string theory is better than the evidence of God. Like we don't need to wait. We can just say, yeah, this theory is right now, it's better. Right now, because all of the parts have been demonstrated. We know for a fact vacuum states are real. We know for a fact early universe inflation is real. And if those two things can combine, then string theory would be a result. So this theory seems to be right now it's better than a God because right now all of the parts are demonstrated, whereas right now all of the parts of God haven't been demonstrated.
Right. And say, back to Occam's razor, what we were saying earlier, to me, it would be like, okay, so physicists say that if we have this, 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 and this, we have all these parts put together, but we can't prove the string theory, but we have all the parts necessary to create a string theory. Or we have an intelligent mind that put everything into motion, created human beings. To me, that's a simpler route to take. That's a simpler route. It's an easier route.
Can you explain to me how that's simpler? Because when I think about simplicity, to me it's like if I'm building a theory or whatever, the simpler theory is the one that only uses things we know about. Like if you add in stuff we don't know about, that makes it less simple. So to me, a simpler theory is one that's only using parts which have been demonstrated, and string theory does that. So string theory is pretty simple. Whereas if I add in like leprechauns or magic or unicorns, things that there's no evidence of, or new particles that there's no evidence of, that makes the theory less simple. And so like if you add in a God who's omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, or whatever, those seem to be very, very less simple because you're adding in stuff we don't know about. Like how do you define simplicity? Do you define it differently than that?
Well, when we're talking about leprechauns, unicorns, magic, like I don't ever include any of that. And it's simple for me because none of those claim to be the creator of the universe. They don't claim to be God. Basically there's only three theistic religions out there. And so none of those are leprechauns, unicorns, Zeus,
Sorry,
like there's
just
no,
to interrupt. I'm not saying they're those. I'm like, I wasn't accusing you of using those in your worldview. My comparison was like if I have a theory of string theory caused the universe, or if I had a theory of like string theory plus a leprechaun caused the universe. If you add in extra parts to any theory that haven't been demonstrated, that would make it a worse theory. So like string theory versus string theory plus leprechaun, just the string theory is simpler. So if you have string theory or the universe plus God, string theory is simpler because all of the parts in string theory have been demonstrated, whereas the parts in God haven't. So like the parts of God have not been demonstrated to exist, just like the parts of a leprechaun have not been demonstrated to exist, or the parts of a unicorn or magic. There isn't any evidence of magic, just like there isn't any evidence of the God empirically, scientifically. And so if you're using that in a theory, that would be a part of the theory which hasn't been demonstrated yet, which would make it a less simple theory, like leprechauns. But I'm not saying there's a leprechaun in your theory anywhere.
so I'm going to sound like a broken horse again. So we're going to go back to the Jason Loves Mary. I'm not going to come across a sign written on the sand that says Jason Loves Mary and just assume that the waves washed up on the shore and wrote it, or a crab did it, or a fish did it. I'm going to know an intelligent being did it. And so when I look at human beings, when I look at the vastness of the universe, for what I consider fine tuning, it's easier for me to sit there and say an intelligent being created this. Not that it came together by random luck, chance.
So what
And
is
so
it?
to me,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So what is it about the fine tuning that is like that? What is it about the fine tuning that is like Jason Loves Mary?
Well, the things that we were talking about earlier, I don't have a list of everything here that they consider the fine tuning, but everything from all the stars, the planets being where they are, the planets being the sizes they are, the sun being where it's at, the moon being where it's at, the Earth being exactly where it's at, the tilt of the Earth, which we talked about earlier, all this had to be in place, including the Big Bang itself had to happen at an expansion rate the exact same way that it had to. For all of that to happen, for us to be here today, I don't think is, I can't chalk that up to a coincidence.
Well, I
Like
mean,
there are literally thousands of fine tuning arguments. And that's why I'm like, I can't even begin to get into all of them. But
specifically,
there's
like, what is it about those that when you look at them, you can identify this is finely tuned versus not finely tuned? Like, how do you identify something that is finely tuned versus not finely tuned? Like, if I look at Jason Loves Mary in the Sand, I can say that was finely tuned because there are no natural forces that can cause that pattern or something like that. But what is the criterion you are using to say this is, when we look at the universe, when we look at all the constants you mentioned?
human beings being here. Simplest way to put it. Us being here today. You and I having this conversation today.
Well, what about that is finely tuned? Like,
Because if everything didn't happen exactly the way it did, and it's still happening, we wouldn't be here today.
so because it's very unlikely, anything that's unlikely is finely tuned.
No, not because it's unlikely. It's because if anything was off just by a little bit, we would not be here today having this conversation.
Isn't that
So
what
it's not
unlikely
like
means?
that could be unlikely. That had to be finely tuned. That had to be created. That's like having, walking up and seeing I'm trying to think. You're losing my thought. I'm old. So coming up and seeing like a mug, and just saying, "Oh, well, that was just placed here. That was just here. Nothing created that. It actually fell out of a metal shop and just happened to look that way." Or if I had a pottery mug, oh, it just happened to fall out of a pottery, barn, and this is how it landed. Was in a perfectly shaped mug with a handle on it and flat base and open in the middle for me to fill up with my coffee. That's, to me, it's like it's more hard to sit there and say that happened by chance, and that's than to say there was an intelligent mind behind this creation.
I'm looking for more like a strict set of criterion. Like, what would a designed universe versus a non-designed universe look like? How would you tell the difference between the two? Like, not just examples of what is designed. Like, I'm grant that you see humans as designed and that the universe is designed, but I want to know, like, why. What is, like, if you're given you 10 universes, what are the things you would look for that'd be like, this one is definitely designed, this one is definitely not designed? Um, how would you? Because for me, when I can say something is designed if and only if there is no force that can produce that other than the things we know about of people. So like pots or coffee mugs, we know for a fact there is no natural force that produces that. We know for a fact people do produce that. Therefore, I can conclude design. And by using these two factors, I can determine what is and isn't designed. What are the factors you're using to determine that anything is or isn't designed? And what would a non-designed universe look like?
I have no idea what a non-designed universe would look like because I don't live in one and I can't create one. So I have no idea what a non-design. If I was to say what would one look like, it looked like what it did before the Big Bang. There was nothing here.
So
So
it, so if the universe did come about by random chance or determined forces, you wouldn't be able to differentiate that from a designed universe. It would still look equally as designed to you because you don't have a way to differentiate necessarily resulting universes from designed universes.
no, because people, and that's why I was saying the people is why I said, me and you having this conversation, because we are what makes the difference. We are the ones that are here today to sit there and say if something was designed or something wasn't designed. If on these other galaxies that you mentioned before, and you said that there was other Earth type at planets and everything else. Now, as far as we know, there's no sentient beings there. We don't know for sure, but as far as we know, there's not. Well, then obviously they can't be extremely fine tuned because by chance, I'm saying by chance, they can't be finely tuned. or there would be people there. There would be something living there. There would have to be something. Because if there's billions of other galaxies, and let's say out of these billions, a quarter of them have planets just like Earth, let's say it's an exact replica of us, they should have beings there. Now, like you said, though, we'll never know because honestly, I mean, we'll never be able to get to them. We'll never be able to travel the speed of light. But, you know,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
just saying,
I think that's a good point.
these are,
Like, if we could travel to all the other planets and found they have the exact same conditions as Earth and for the same amount of time and whatever, but didn't produce life, then yeah, I think that would definitely be a good reason to conclude life was finely tuned or designed in some kind because something must be different. If all of the other constants are the same and there's no life, then yeah, I think that's a reasonable argument to say that yeah, life is finely tuned for sure.
so yeah. So that's what I considered finely tuned. And I believe that because I'm a Christian, obviously in the Bible, you know, and I'm not trying to bring the Bible into our little talk here, but, you know, that's why Earth has humans. That's why we're here and we're the only ones here. I don't believe that there are other beings. I don't believe there's aliens out there, you know, whatever we want to call them, you know, but because I
So
believe Earth is where we were born to be. This is where we're supposed to be.
So if we did discover aliens and planets with other humans, would that be a challenge for your faith? Would that make it seem like we're not as finely
No, I
tuned?
don't think so because I don't. Okay, let me give two-part answers here. I don't think so because there would still have to be something that created these other beings. But the reason I don't believe that there's other beings out there, and I used to, so that's what I'm saying. Like I've never not always been a Christian my whole life. I used to believe in aliens. In fact, I live out in the country, and sometimes me and my wife see some weird stuff flying around out here. And just the other day, we saw something weird, and you know, we still call it UFOs because we're like, "What are you going to call it? We don't even
Yeah.
know what it is."
Yeah, UFO just means unidentified flying
Yeah,
object.
you
So
know, but
does,
you know,
doesn't mean
most people think of
alien.
little green aliens,
Yeah.
but we're just like, "What the heck was that?" You know, like we don't know what that was, but we live about 2 hours from an Air Force base, so I never know what's going on. But the reason I don't believe anything else exists is because I'm a Christian, so I know we've been talking about theistic God, but to the Christian side of God, that would mean that any being that has free will that God created on all these other planets, they're going to mess up. They're going to sin. So that means that Jesus would literally have to go from planet to galaxy to planet to galaxy and die for all these other beings' sins. And I really don't think that God's going to be like, let's just keep killing my kid over and over and over, you know, a billion times because there's all these other people out here that are messing up. If that makes sense. I'm just trying to sum it up. But
What, you don't think Jesus' death on Earth would apply to all the other beings in the universe? Like, I think I could do that. That could work.
no, I don't think it did. I think it had to do with us because, um, well, he came as a human. He didn't come as whatever else would have been on other planets. And they might have been human. We don't know. But how would they have ever heard of Jesus if he didn't come to their planet? If that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to sum it up. I
yeah,
know it's
yeah.
just like a way thought out there, but I'm just saying it's just like I don't see that happening.
So, why do you think that our universe must have been designed, but God wasn't? Like, why can God be a non-designed thing, but the universe can't be a non-designed thing?
Because I believe there had to be a first cause on cause.
I mean, I agree, but I think that's a part of the universe, like the quantum field. So, why do you think
Yeah,
that?
you believe.
Why do you think?
So,
Like,
yeah,
why would like if I said who designed God? How would you answer?
nobody.
And so, why can't I just say nobody designed the quantum field? Why would that be less justified?
Because there has to be an intelligent mind to start something. Things don't start on their own. Nothing starts on its own.
Right. So God has a nature. God is perfectly good, all powerful, all knowing, perfectly moral. Um, that couldn't have not started on its own. It's a very complicated thing. Like, for example, for each different way the universe could be, like there could be a universe with only black holes or a universe with only unicorns. Each one of those, there could be a God who could have created the universe exactly that way. So why does God have this particular nature to create a universe exactly this way? It seems like his nature must be finely tuned because there's lots of different ways his nature could be. like a universe of only black holes or something. So why is that any different from saying like the universe itself is necessary? Because it has a finely tuned nature, just like God has a finely tuned nature, but neither one would need to be designed because just because they could be different doesn't necessarily mean they're not necessary.
Well, so let me ask some questions first so I can understand what you're saying. So when you say God's nature is finely tuned, I don't know how to take that because I don't know exactly what you're saying. Because to me, it's his nature is not finely tuned. It's like it's saying, like the Euthyphro dilemma. It's like you have those two options where, does God say it's good and that's why it's good, or is it good and so God says it's good? And to me, there's always that dilemma where it's the third option where it's good is just God's nature. That's who he is. That's a part of who he is. It's not something that he does, or it's not something that he creates. It's just his part of his nature. As in basically, and I'm trying to dumb things down. So me saying I'm white, I can't change that. That's just what I am. And it's the same thing with God's nature. He's just good. He's good. He's powerful, and he's all knowing. So that's just part of his nature. So ask your question again. Now that you understand where I'm thinking, what was your question?
Yeah. So when I say God is finely tuned, what I mean is that if any of God's properties were even slightly different, then life wouldn't exist. So like if God was didn't only cared about unicorns, then there would be no humans. Or if God only cared about black holes, then there would be no humans. Or if God didn't like potatoes, then there would be no humans or something. So God's nature could be different. If it was even slightly different, then there would be no humans. There would be no life. So just like when you say that if the gravitational constant was even slightly different, there would be no life. If God's nature was even slightly different, there would be no life. And so we could imagine a God who only created black holes. That's a possibility. So it seems like God's nature is equally as fine-tuned as the gravitational constant is fine-tuned.
But that's only a possibility if you believe that God's nature could have been slightly different. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like from a Christian's perspective or a theistic God's perspective, God can't be different because he's a perfect being. If a perfect being can't change, there's no reason to change because they're perfect. They don't lack anything. They don't need anything. So your question only works if in the thought of you believe God can change, or if he wants to change something, which God doesn't change anything because he's a perfect being. So I can't, I don't have much to give you on that because
Oh, that's perfect. So can't we say the same thing about the universe though? Like you say the reason the universe is finely tuned is because it could be different. I could just reply the same thing you did and say, well, that's only if you think the universe could be different. Maybe the universe couldn't be different. In which case,
but it can.
well, so one second before we get to there. So I can say that the universe could not be different, and then it wouldn't be fine tuned anymore. The fine tuning problem would be gone now, just for the same reason that you think because God could not have been different, God isn't finely tuned. I could say because the universe could not be different, the universe is not finely tuned. And then you would, of course, say, well, it can be different. And then I would say, well, God can be different too. God could have only created a universe of only black holes or only wanted unicorns or whatever. So it seems like, why would you say that God not being able to be different is any more likely than the universe not being able to be different? Because it seems like they could both be different.
Because the God that created the universe and the God that created human beings and created morality can't be different. Because if he was different, then the laws of,
Physics?
like the laws of nature, the laws of physics, none of these could exist if his nature changed. Like if laws of physics were constantly changing, we couldn't perform science. There's just no way. If the laws of physics and the laws of nature and, all the known laws that we do have, the laws of thermodynamics, whatever is constantly changing, or even like the speed of light. If the speed of light was to change from 186,000 miles per second or whatever it is to, let's say, tomorrow it decided to change to 100,000 miles per second. Well, there's a lot of science that we couldn't use no more because the laws are constantly changing on us. And so if God's nature could constantly change, then we can, and that's what I'm saying. You have to, I don't know how to say this. Um, God's nature can't change. If God's nature changed, then we wouldn't have morality. We wouldn't have the laws that we have now, because everything had to be grounded in something. Everything has to be grounded. If it's not grounded in something, then we can perform any type of science. Like, we have to perform science off the things that we know are grounded in the laws of physics and the laws of nature. And so if God's nature itself changed, if God is true and if God is real, then we wouldn't be able to perform anything because all of it would be grounded in his nature.
So two things there. One is that, so I'm not bringing up God's nature changing. I'm saying God, there could have been a God who was just always different than what you imagine the Christian God to be like. And if there was a different God, there would be different laws of physics. I think that's what fine tuning means. Fine tuning means that if there was a different thing, then you would have different outcomes. So the reason the universe is finely tuned is because if the gravitational constant was different, you'd have the universe would look very different. Like, that's what makes it fine tuned. So it seems like God's nature is also finely tuned, and that if God's nature changed any bit, then it would be a totally different universe. I totally agree. But why is that a problem? Why is it a problem to imagine there was a different kind of a God who could have made...
Go ahead. Because if God is true and if God is real and all the attributes of God are true, that he's perfect, he's all-knowing, and everything else, if all that is true, and then you got on the other side, what you're saying is you have the universe. Well, the universe we know is dying. We know sooner or later it's going to go into heat death. We know that for a fact. So therefore, I guess it's hard for me to sit there and say, well, it could be the same as God, because if all the attributes of God that what I've said so far are true, then God will never die. He will never pass away. But this universe will. And we know that for a fact.
Well, so what I'm asking is like, the gravitational constant is one way, and it could be a different way. It could change. Why can't God's nature also be like a dial where it could have been differently? So like, why does it, like, God could have a different morality where he values not people or lizards or something, or a different thing he cares about, like black holes. So God's nature is just like the gravitational constant in that it can change, whereas you seem to be saying, no, God's nature could only be one way. And I'm asking, why can it only be one way? Why couldn't there have been a different God who could have been a different way?
Probably not going to like my answer. So because of us being here right now and everything that's happened right now couldn't be different than what it already is. If it was, then God would not be perfect, because that means God would have had to change something. So therefore, God can't change. If God would change, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be talking right now if God could change his nature. But God doesn't have to change because it is perfect. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that sounds a lot like the anthropic principle in physics. The anthropic principle is that any consideration of the structure of the universe has to take into account of what it looks like now. So, but you can say that about nature too. You can say, well, nature couldn't be different because if nature was different, we wouldn't have what we have now, and we do have what we have now. Therefore, nature couldn't have been different. But obviously that's a silly argument, because you can say, of course it could be different. You could just change the gravitational constant, like if you can imagine it changing. Therefore, it could have been different. Well, it seems like just like you can imagine the gravitational constant changing, I can imagine God's nature changing. So what is it about God that, or the universe, what's the difference between God and the universe here, where you can imagine one changing and then conclude, therefore it's able to change, that doesn't apply to the other one.
Because something had to have created one or the other. If God didn't create the universe, then he's not God. Something has to be the first cause on cause. Something has to be at the beginning. Something has to give rise to one or the other. You can't have two things come into existence. Like for me sitting there saying it's God, you saying it's the universe. Both of those couldn't have happened at the same time. One had to start the other.
Right.
And we know the universe doesn't have a mind. It doesn't have, it can't pick and choose. It's just random chance, according to you. It's just random chances. So something had to give it a divine start. Now, as far as God changing, like I said, if he did change and if he could change, then I'm worshiping the wrong God. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
If God could change his nature in any form or fashion, I would be worshiping the wrong God. It's like I tell people all the time. They're like, well, how do you know the Christian God's the right God? Well, there's only two ways. Either Jesus rose from the dead, and that's true, or if they find Jesus' body, game over. Christianity's not true. I'm worshiping the wrong God. I mean, it's that simple.
Right. So let's just grant, for the sake of the argument, there is a God. Let's just, no universe possibility. And I say God is finely tuned, and the reason God is finely tuned is because he could be different. So we granting God exists. Like we're in heaven, we're in a coffee shop in heaven, and we see God to the left, like God's over there, and I'm like, God's finely tuned. He could be different because I can imagine his properties being changed. And you would say, no, he can't be different because why?
Because he wouldn't be God.
Sure, that would be kind of the point.
Because the way he is right now is perfect. So if he was to be different, he wouldn't be God.
Okay, now we're going back to the universe hypothesis. I could say the reason the universe couldn't be different is because it's perfect, and it can't. If it was any different, it wouldn't be the universe.
Well, it's not perfect. It's just finely tuned.
Well, I could say this. I go back and say the same thing about God. God isn't perfect. He's just finely tuned.
But if he wasn't perfect, he wouldn't be God.
Yes, but I can say the same thing. If the universe wasn't perfect, it wouldn't be the universe. Do you see why that's not really a compelling argument when you change it to...
No, because I think that you're confusing, and I'm not saying you're confusing, or maybe I'm getting confused, but I think you're confusing to me is perfect and fine tuning. I think the universe is fine tuned, but I don't think there's a physicist in the world that would say the universe is perfect, that it's perfectly ordained. It's perfectly here. I don't think I'm not going to say there's not. I just haven't heard one say it's perfect, So I think there's a difference between saying something's fine tuned and then something's perfect. I can finely tune my vehicle, but my vehicle isn't a perfect running machine. It's going to die, so.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about here is what is the difference between perfect and fine tuning? Because it seems to be arbitrary. It seems to be that you're just labeling God as perfect because that's what you believe is perfect, whereas someone else could just label the universe as perfect because that's what they believe is perfect. And so what is the difference? How do you tell the difference between the two?
Because something that's perfect doesn't have to change. That's the difference for me. The universe is constantly changing.
The laws of physics?
No, not the laws of physics, but the universe itself. Like the universe is, it's slowly dying. If it was perfect, it wouldn't die. If it was perfect, we wouldn't have stars exploding, becoming black holes. They would just stay shine forever because it would be perfect. It's not perfect. It's just finely tuned for life to exist on Earth. So when you sit there and say,
why couldn't we say the laws of physics are perfect? Because they don't change. So the laws of physics, the quantum field,
that's true.
They don't change. Can't we say those are perfect?
I would say those are perfect. As far as we know right now, unless they discover something else.
Remember, we're trying to tell the difference between perfect and finely tuned. So if they are perfect and God is perfect, then they couldn't have been different. So wouldn't that mean that we could just say the laws of physics don't need to be finely tuned? They're not created because they're not finely tuned. They're perfect.
No, because laws have to be given by lawmakers.
Uh,
Laws just don't come in existence by themselves. Something had to create laws.
okay, well, in my understanding, laws in physics aren't created. They're by definition just regularities of nature. So laws in the legal system have to be created, but in all of science, when someone says law, they mean not created. That means a regularity in nature. So I don't think in science they use law in that way.
See, I think all the laws are grounded in God's nature. All the laws that we use are grounded in God's nature. The laws of logic, the laws of physics, the laws of nature. I think they're grounded in his nature.
Sure.
I don't think he created them. I just think they're an attribute of his nature.
Okay, but what I was saying was that I grant that in a legal system, for a law to exist, somebody must have created it. Absolutely. If there's a legal law, somebody has to have created it. But in physics, laws don't mean that. So why do you think that you said if there is a law, there must be a lawgiver? In the legal system, 100% agree with you. In science, doesn't seem to be the case. Like we don't have any examples of any laws in physics that have ever been created. Um, that's of course what you believe, of course, but in a legal system you can definitely say that there's lots of evidence. If there's a law in a legal system, must have been created, but in physics and science that's never been the case. So why would you think that this principle that applies to a legal system would also apply to any time anyone says the word law?
So it's not the word law. It's just, I guess it's an easier analogy for people, but it's not the word law. It's just like the laws of logic. We'll just use those for right now. The laws of logic, if they are grounded in human minds, then they can change. If they're grounded on human concepts, it can change. But the laws of logic can't change. So it has to be grounded outside of something other than the human mind. Because if that was the case, then your laws of logic could be different from my laws of logic. But yet we both know there's only one set of laws of logic that are true. And so for to get to the truth, there has to be something outside of the human mind, outside of the human concept of the laws of logic to create the laws of logic for all of us to know what the laws of logic are. And we can sit there and, someone could sit there and say, well, you know, well, that's true for you, but not for me, but we know that's not true. If you use just basic common sense, that's not true. And so there has to be something outside of our minds that created the laws for all of us to know what these laws are.
Yeah. So I agree. I think that the laws of logic are languages that humans made up to describe reality. So you could change the laws of logic, say A is not A or something. It would just not be
Right.
true. It would be false. And the reason it would be false is because it doesn't describe reality. It's not that reality made A equals A. It's
But
that reality is A equals A. So like if I said,
but whose reality?
who's there's only one, like reality is everything that exists. There isn't like a subjective reality. It's all reality.
Well, but let's go to the reason I say whose reality is because let's say Stalin's reality. His reality is obviously far different from my reality. He believed in let's kill all the people, or Hitler, let's kill all the people that are that are maimed and everything else because it's going to be better for our world. That was his reality. That was his truth. That's his reality. And you can't tell him that because you can't tell him, no, that's not right because that's his reality. But that's not your reality. But we all know what Hitler did was wrong. So therefore, we have to know that there is something outside of all of our minds that are telling us this ain't right. Because if we were basing the laws of logic, for instance, like what we were just using, or any of the laws, off of our own thoughts of what you said, reality, who's reality.
Well, it's not thoughts. So reality is reality, and no one gets an opinion on it. There is reality, and I can make sentences that describe reality. I can say like there is a tree outside. That is a sentence that describes reality. And I can change the sentence. I can say there is not a tree outside. Now that sentence would be wrong. It would be false because it doesn't describe reality. Logic works the exact same way. If I say A equals A, that is true because it describes reality. And if I say A does not equal A, that is false because it does not describe reality. The laws of logic don't exist. They're languages humans made up, just like English, but some of them describe reality and some of them don't describe reality. Like math, you can do the same thing. There's math that describes reality, 1 plus 1 equals 2. There's math that doesn't describe reality, like F equals ma times 37. F equals ma is one of Newton's laws, and if you just add times 37, it just stops describing reality. And there's math that's self-contradictory, like saying 1 plus 1 equals 7. It contradicts itself. Just like English. English has sentences that describe reality. There is a tree outside. Sentences that do not describe reality. There is not a tree outside. And sentences that are self-contradictory. I am a married bachelor. So math and logic are languages, just like English, and they don't like exist outside of our minds. But there is something outside of our minds telling us if they are right, which is reality. If they describe reality, they're right. And if they don't describe reality, they're not right. But they don't need like a mind or anything out there. It's just, does this language that we've constructed describe reality or not?
So going back to reality. So let's say I saw this demonstration a long time ago. So let's say I have a Dr. Pepper 20 ounce bottle in my hand, and you're standing on one side of it, and I'm standing on the other side. And someone's standing dead middle, and the dead middle person person in the middle says to me, "What do you see?" Dr. Pepper. They ask you, "What do you see?" You start reading off all the ingredients because that's what you see. That's your reality. And this is my reality at the time. So there can be different realities. It's just from someone's perspective, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So there can be different realities, but there's only one truth.
Right.
And that one truth is what I mean is grounded in God's nature. There only can be one law of logic. There only can be one truth. And the truth is we both see the same things. We're just seeing it from different perspectives. And that's what I'm saying. I don't know if I'm taking your word for reality, right? Or maybe I'm misconstruing it.
Yeah, I think like reality to me doesn't mean a subjective perception. Like a subjective perception or what I see isn't reality. Reality is everything that exists independent of what anybody sees. So reality would be like God would be in reality because he exists or doesn't exist, whatever one. Or whichever, all of the things that exist would be, that's what reality means. Reality, the word reality means all things that exist.
So do you believe the laws of logic would exist if no human beings were here?
No, but they would still describe reality. So the laws of logic are a language that humans made up to describe reality. So reality would exist if no humans existed. And the laws of logic would still describe reality, but the laws of logic themselves are just sentences that we made up. So it's like saying, would dinosaurs exist if humans didn't? I mean, of course they would, but the word dinosaur wouldn't exist because we made up the word dinosaur. The laws of logic are like the word dinosaur.
So you're saying, so I'm just trying to understand where you're at. So you're saying if no human beings were here, and if I said, and if there's one rock on Earth, and I said there's one rock on Earth,
that would still be true? Yes.
So, but you don't think that those laws have to be grounded in a mind somewhere?
No, the rock doesn't have a mind, but the rock is still existing.
No, not the rock. The laws of logic.
Well, that's what I mean. Like you can say all of reality, think it's just rocks or whatever. Say there's no mind. All of reality can still exist, and you can still make sentences like there is a rock over there. That rock is bigger than that rock. And all of those statements will still be true, even if there's no mind, even if no mind created the universe, if there's just a mindless universe, all of the sentences would still be true about it. So you don't need a mind to ground logic. You just need something to exist. If anything exists, then the fact that it exists can ground logic and math, because logic and math would then describe the thing that exists.
So I'm just trying to understand where you're at. So you're saying the laws of logic, laws of mathematics, physics, none of those things have to be grounded in anything. They just are.
They have to be grounded in describing something that exists. So if something exists, math and logic are then grounded as languages to describe the thing that exists. But it can be grounded in anything that exists. If anything exists, then that can ground math and logic.
So why couldn't that thing be God?
It could be. I never said it couldn't be.
Hey, so we got somewhere.
Sure.
You're saying could be.
Well, yeah. I don't think God
I'll
is.
take it. I'll take it.
I don't think God
Let's
is
just stop right
impossible.
there. I'll take it.
Okay.
I'll take it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not somebody who says God is impossible for sure. That would be like God is a round square. It's not possible. Something, but
And that's the same with me when it comes to Christianity. Like I tell people all the time, they're like, how do you know Christianity? Like I was telling you earlier, how do you know Christianity's right? It might not be. I might be worshiping the wrong God. I don't think I am from the studying I've done, but sure, they find the body of Jesus Christ. Game over. Christianity's false. I better go look for Muhammad or something. I don't know.
yeah. Well, if we die and we don't meet God, that would also disprove it too, right?
There you go.
Yep.
If we die and there's nothing left, that.
Christianity is falsifiable.
But and I forgot the philosopher that said it. You might know, honestly. I forgot his name. I'm sure I got it on a slide somewhere. But to me, when it boils down to it, and I'll be the first to say it, I have a son that's on the edge, about Christianity or just God in general, and like I've told him, I was like, but if you understand God like through the Bible, and don't go off of what people say, and I'm not saying you do this, but I'm just saying for other people that sit there and like, oh, God's evil, God's this and that. Now, if you read the Bible, he's not evil. He's a very loving God, but you do have to understand the Bible. You do have to read it for, you can't just read it at face value and be like, oh, this is what it is. If you study it and read it and understand it, and you know God's loving, then why not live as if there is a God? So that way, if you do pass away, you get to go to heaven, or, like you seem like a very nice man, everything else, and, if you don't choose to follow God, that's your choice, and I'm sure you've heard other people say it, God's not going to force you into heaven for all eternity against your will. So he lets you choose where you want to be. And so I tell my son, in fact, I just told him I had this conversation with him this morning. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to rather be in a place of paradise and be with God and not be with him? When I told him, I was like, you're a good kid. You're doing good things. You're living a good life. I'm like, so why not just look into it? And but he's 25. So
I think that's Pascal's wager. Pascal's the philosopher.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Pascal's wager. Yes.
Yeah. So my take on Pascal's wager is that it's equally as likely that believing in God would get you to heaven as not believing in God. Like there could be a God who could only let atheists into heaven, like an atheist God, or there could be a heaven with no God. Like there's possible afterlives that don't have anything to do with a God. There's supernatural ones, natural ones. There's all kinds of different abilities for there to be an afterlife with or without a God. And if you think that the act of believing would get you an afterlife, it seems equally as likely to me that the act of believing in a God and the act of not disbelieving in a God, both of those seem to be equally as likely to get you into heaven. So why do you think that the act of believing in a God would make it more likely to get you into heaven?
It's not that the believing in God that's what gets you into heaven. And I think that's a big misconception. It's not believing in Jesus that, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. I don't believe that. What throws us into hell is our sin. Sin is like a cancer. If a person dies, well, why did they die? They had cancer. Well, why do we go to hell? Because we have cancer, we have sin. And so it's just believing in Jesus will cure you of that sin, will cure you of that cancer, and you will spend eternity in God's presence. And so for people, and people ask us all the time, and sometimes it catches you off guard, and when people stand up and they'll say stuff like, so I don't believe in God, am I going to hell? Yeah, no, I would never tell somebody that. But I mean,
It's like, no, you're going to hell because your nose is just ugly. That's why you're going to hell.
yeah, yeah. It's just because you're retarded, man. No, it's. But I tell people it's. I tell people I'm like, it's not for me to say who's going to heaven or who to hell. But what I will say is, if you don't want God now, why do you think? And if I'm claiming God's all loving, that's my God. And if He's all loving, why would He force you into His presence for all eternity when you don't want nothing to do with Him? And so hell is the exact opposite. You're just out of His presence for all of eternity. You're just not in His presence no more. And so everyone on earth, whether atheist or Christian or not, to me, we all get God's grace because we're all still here. It's just, when we're all gone, it's whether, if you're going to spend eternity with Him or without Him. And so, but from what you're saying, though, what you were talking earlier, so you say you're an atheist, but you're saying that you're not denying there's any possibilities. So are you an agnostic atheist?
No, so I think it's more reasonable to conclude there is not a God, but you can't like prove it with 100% certainty. So I think that
Right.
the more reasonable position is to conclude that God is a thing made up by human minds, like Harry Potter or leprechauns or something. I think that is the conclusion that is supported by the most evidence.
But you said there's a possibility. You
Sure.
said that there could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
But
possible that
not a
leprechauns.
theistic God, because you were talking about afterlives and everything else. So that wouldn't be a theistic God. That'd be more of just a God in general.
Both would be possible. So like a deistic God who doesn't care about you, that's possible. A pantheistic God where nature itself has some divine quality, that's possible. Panentheism, panendeism, polytheism, those are all possible. But it's like, I think leprechauns are possible. Like it's possible there's little invisible green men going around planting gold, but I think it's more reasonable to conclude that they don't exist. So I can't prove they don't. It's possible, but the evidence includes that they're probably just something humans made up. So I think that even though it's possible, the evidence indicates it's most likely not the case.
I got you. So you believe that. So let's get back to your naturalism, because you're a naturalist, right?
Yep.
Naturalism?
Yep.
Okay. So, and help me understand. So, how do you think that naturalism is more of an explanation instead of being a materialist?
Well, materialists are a kind of naturalist, but there can be
So
other.
you're just kind of combining the two, I guess.
No, not exactly. So like all flowers are roses, but not all roses are flowers. So like there are kinds of flowers that aren't roses. So all materialists are naturalists, but not all naturalists are materialists. So there's kinds of naturalists that go beyond materialism, but it's still all natural stuff.
Okay.
So my view is called naturalistic pantheism, which is that there is an eternal, all-powerful law of nature, quantum field thingy that is out there, and it can be beyond material. That's fine. So I'm not a part of the materialist naturalist necessarily, but yeah. So my view is called naturalistic pantheism, eternal, all-powerful, natural thing.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so you believe this naturalism, these subatomic particles and the
Quantum fields.
and in these quantum fields by random chance came together and
Well, I'd say
the
necessity.
universe.
I would say that they have a necessary nature that couldn't be different, and because of their necessary nature, they would create the universe. So not chance.
But what created their nature to be like that?
It is uncreated. It is necessary. It's always been there.
Is there evidence for this?
The parts of quantum fields have been demonstrated to exist. So in that sense, yes. The combination, again, no.
So kind of like the string theory, kind of
Yep.
the parts are all there, but it haven't been put together yet.
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna have to do some research into that.
Yeah, I think my favorite one is just to Google emergent spacetime. That's one of the things in physics people are working on. And naturalistic,
Emergent space time.
yes, emergent spacetime. And naturalistic pantheism is in the section of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on pantheism. So if you just Google Stanford pantheism and then just go down the page, there's a section for naturalistic pantheism.
Okay, I totally lost that when I was listening to you talk. Emerge. What was the? You told me to Google again.
Emergent spacetime.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look this up.
Cool. Oh, you mentioned the Euthyphro dilemma. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that because my
Yes.
understanding of the Euthyphro dilemma is either something is good because God deems it good, or it's good for some other reason than God deems it good.
Correct.
Why is that a false dilemma?
Because there's a third option, and that's because goodness is God's nature.
Well, that would be the second option. So the first option is something good because God says it's good? And the second option is something good for any other reason than God says it's good? If you're saying it's God's nature, that would be something different than God said so. That's God's nature.
Well, the Euthyphro dilemma is kind of like what you were saying. Okay, so does God say it's good because it's good, or is it good because God says so? But it's
Those are the
good
same
because
thing.
it's.
So
Did
Euthyphro
I say that
dilemma.
backwards? Maybe
Yeah.
I did.
Well,
So
so the way I understand it is the Euthyphro dilemma started from a Socrates dialogue where he says, "Is the
yes,
pious pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it is pious?" And the way that translates
yes.
into the God debate is something good because God says so, or did God say it's good because it's good based off some independent criterion? So is it only good because God says so, or is there some independent criterion that makes it good and that's why he said so?
Because what we're saying is, in simpler terms, is it good because God said it was, or did God say it was good because He just thought so?
No, those would be the same thing.
Basically.
Those would be the same
Well,
thing.
no, because you're saying so. Basically, if I saw a cat and said, "Oh, that's good," so that would be God saying this is a good thing, or is something good and God says it's good?
Is something good and then God says it's good. So it's already good and then God said so because it's already good. Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is the third option is it's not him saying either or, it's just in his nature.
Right. So forget the Euthyphro dilemma and just answer my version. So we can consider this my version, the TJump version of the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something be good only because God said so? Or did God say it was good because there's this set of criteria that you can determine whether or not something's good, and God looked at that criteria and said, yes, this is good?
No, there is no criteria. It's just in his nature.
Wouldn't that would be the criteria? So the criteria is there is this non-conscious nature of God, and God can look in and see his nature and say this is the good thingy, and then he can look at this other thing and say, does this thing match his nature, yes or no? And so he's like, yes, this matches my nature, or no, this does not match my nature. So he's not just saying I like this, therefore it's good. He's
But
saying that.
if you say it the way you're phrasing it, then there's no Euthyphro dilemma.
Well, the dilemma would be that if God is looking at his internal non-conscious nature and saying that I can look at this and know what is good, then you don't need consciousness for goodness. So, like, you can say there's this nature of the universe or whatever, and it's good. So the dilemma is that if something is only good because God said it, then goodness is arbitrary, and if something is good not because of God's conscious nature, not because of a conscious decision, but some other non-conscious thing like God's nature, then you don't need a consciousness for morality. You can have a non-conscious thing ground morality.
Hold on, I'm trying to look this up. Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? Where's that? Well, that was no help.
What are you looking up?
Oh, I had some notes I put in here somewhere, and I'm trying to figure out where I put them. And it's about the Euthyphro dilemma. I talked about this in my book.
Can you do like a Control F search, Euthyphro?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I was trying to find. I can't find it. Let's see. Maybe this is it. So, okay. So the Euthyphro dilemma, the way I understand it is this: is I can't even find what I was looking for, but the way I find it is this: is basically, is this good because God says it is, or um, or because okay, what is it? I'm trying to. I wish I had my book out here.
Oh, the way you said it before was, is something good because God said it is, or is it good and therefore God said it was?
So basically, the way you're saying it is almost as if God is having to look beyond innate, like beyond something else, to say if something's good.
Right. So the reason I bring this up is because William Lane Craig and Frank Turek, when they address this, they completely miss the point. Like all of the academic philosophers are like, that has nothing to do with the actual dilemma. Like that, it's just you just apply the dilemma to the same thing. That's why I bring this up, because the real dilemma, what it's really asking is it good because God said so? Just like his opinion. Does he have an opinion? I think it's good, therefore it's good. Or is there something more than his opinion? Something outside of his consciousness that's determining whether this is good, and which would be like his nature. That's fine. You can say it's his nature, and that wouldn't be the same as saying it's just a whim, a conscious whim. And so in philosophy, in the academic philosophy, what they're asking is something good only because God says so? That's it. The only reason God says so, that's what makes it good. Or is there more to it? Is it some other feature that isn't a conscious decision that makes it good? Is it beyond? So like in philosophy, a true dichotomy is either P or not P. And then this question is it God's whim or not God's whim that makes something good?
But I don't think it's found upon like his consciousness. I believe it's just his nature.
Yeah, that's perfectly
And so
fine.
I do know what you're talking about. I do know what you're talking about with Frank Turek and William Lane Craig. I've seen it many times, and sometimes, honestly, when they answer it, it kind of confuses me when they give their answers. So I do know what you're saying, and I'm trying to not say it the same way as them.
Well,
So
I think your answer is fine. I
to
think if you want to say
to
that,
me, it's not a dilemma because it's either okay. If you want to break out, like Frank Turek uses it and William Lane Craig uses it, and I actually just used it about. There's a third option.
yep.
There's not a third option. Let's just break it down to this. It's either does God have to figure out if something's good? Does he have to look to something above himself, or is it just part of his nature? That's what I'm saying. Like that's really what it boils down to. Is it just part of who he is, or is it that he has to decide if something's good? If that makes sense.
Yep.
Like, is he having to come to a conscious decision? Like, yeah, that's good. Yeah, we could call that good. Or is it just part of who he is?
Yeah.
And so to me, it's just goodness is just a part of his nature. It's just a part of who he is. He doesn't have to decide it. He doesn't have to think about it. It's like, for us, for instance, I'm not telling, blood cells inside my body right now to keep creating blood cells that create my skin to be white. They just do it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the way it is with God's nature. It is what it is. It's his nature.
Yeah, that's perfectly
He don't,
fine. So I would just say that means you don't need consciousness for morality. So like normally in the moral debate, they say that, well, you need morality to be grounded in the consciousness, and that's when I usually bring up the Euthyphro dilemma, because if you don't, if morality can be grounded in God's nature and it's not his conscious decision, you don't need a conscious decision, then morality can be grounded in like a law of nature, physics nature. So you can say, okay, if morality can be grounded in God's nature and he doesn't have to think about it, then it could also be grounded in nature's nature and it doesn't need a mind to think about it either. So you can also have objective morality without a God. That's usually the way I use the argument.
So you think you can have objective morality without God?
Yes. I have a model of objective morality. So fun fact, most philosophers are atheists, like 70% or something, and most philosophers believe in objective morality. So I think it's 60% or something. So most philosophers who are atheists also believe in objective morality. Yes.
So where do you think morality comes from?
There's my model is a law of physics, kind of like gravity. I think it's a thing in the universe. Most philosophers say it's either like there's a Platonic object theory, there's a priori abstract theory, there's a naturalistic realism theory, moral realism. There's a whole bunch of different moral theories of what they think it could be. What I think it is it's an undiscovered law of nature.
So you think it's an undiscovered law of nature?
Yes.
So how would it be grounded in our minds?
It's not. It has nothing to do with the human. Or do you mean how does it get to our minds?
Like, or our brains?
Yeah.
So
So
do you believe in minds or do you believe in brains?
I think those are the same thing. I think minds and brains
Okay,
are the
okay,
same.
okay.
So I think like gravity affects us because it goes through the universe and hits us. I think that the moral law is the same thing. It goes through the universe and hits our brains, and we feel it.
And so what about people that break those laws? What do you think of those people?
The law doesn't
Like serial killers, rapists.
Well, it's like gravity. You can jump. Like you can go up. We can fly. We can go to space. We can go against the
Temporarily,
law.
though.
Well, you can go to space permanently and just keep going.
Yeah, if you jump out of the plane. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
So
if you jump out of the spaceship.
so if there's a law that is weak enough, it doesn't force you to obey it. You can go against it. So the moral law is weak enough that it doesn't force you to obey it, and you can go against it.
I've never heard someone think that. Sorry, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, you can look more about it by going for moral
Yeah,
realism.
I've never heard
Stanford Encyclopedia of
someone's-
Philosophy has a page called Moral Realism, or Moral Naturalism, where you can read more about it.
and it's a study of how they are trying to prove, I guess. Is that what they're trying to do? They're trying to prove that morality is a law?
It's philosophy. So they're describing all of the possibilities of how morality can exist without a god. Moral naturalism. Their morality is a natural phenomenon of the world.
Huh. And how are they trying to say? Because you're saying that your opinion, you said, was you believe it's a law. So what do they kind of claim? The same thing, that it's a law?
Yeah, laws is one of them. Platonic objects is another one. A priori abstract is another one. So there's lots of different possibilities of ways to get objective morality without a god.
So when being cruel and mean and is more favorable most of the time, why would the law of morality care?
The law of morality,
Like, for instance, for me, from my existence, if I want to say I want to go rob a bank and kill some people and take their stuff, and that's going to help me survive. So why would that be wrong?
well, wrong and survive isn't the same thing. Like just because something helps you to survive doesn't make it right. So it's like it's two different laws.
Like, I mean, you can just skip the analogy. I'm just trying to say, like, for instance, how come when people do bad things, like for instance, rape, why is rape wrong if rape is really just helping us to propagate the world?
Because it goes against the moral law. So even though it might help with biology, it still goes against the moral law, so it's wrong. So it's like if I
But there
said
can't be a
Go ahead.
there can't I can't wrap my mind around that there's a law that sits there and tells us what's right and wrong.
Why?
Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't know if I'm losing you or what, but that just doesn't, like, I can't wrap my mind around that.
Why does that not make sense? Like, can you imagine there is a law of physics that interacts with our brain and causes us to have certain feelings?
That there's a law,
Yeah,
not believing there's chemicals inside of us that react that can give us feelings.
right.
Yes.
So those would include, like, it can give us moral feelings too, right?
Yeah, but that would be same thing as moral relativism. So somebody in Africa, that lives in a tribe that says raping and sacrificing these babies is what we do, but they will never know that they're wrong unless somebody tells them they're wrong.
Unless you
So
can,
why isn't the moral law hit them? The
uh,
laws of morality hit them.
well, it's the same reason why certain people can see more spectrums of light than others. So the fact that our biology has not been designed enough to be affected by it means that some people will be more affected by it or more aware of it than others. Like animals, I don't think are as affected by it as humans. They aren't as like driven by the law because their cognitive abilities of their brain haven't developed enough where they can actually feel it and develop it as much. So just like any other thing in nature, some animals, some species can be more aware of it than others.
So are the laws of morality, and I'm asking you because your opinions. So are the laws of morality, do they evolve?
No, just our awareness of them evolves.
And you think they've just always been here?
Yep, just like gravity and the other laws of physics.
So before the creation of the universe, you believe the laws of morality were around,
Yep,
but nothing created them. They
yep,
just always been.
yep.
So it's like easier for me to understand. Like I guess for me, what I'm hearing, and I mean, I understand you're an atheist, so I'm not trying to insult you here. So what I'm trying to say though is, it's almost sounds like you have your like a set of gods,
Yeah, like in a
but they're
way,
just like they're
there's
just different forms. Like you got the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics, the laws of logic, the laws of morality. These are gods to you because they have always been here. They've always been around. Nothing created them, and they'll never go away.
yeah, like everyone thinks there's a necessary thing that's always been there. Nobody thinks there is literally nothing. So everybody has a necessary thing. The reason it's not a god is because there's no consciousness. It's not a conscious entity. That's the only thing that doesn't make it a god. So like it's still a cult of naturalistic pantheism. So there's still a necessary thing there. All of the different versions of theism, pantheism, dilotheism, or dilotheism doesn't, but henotheism, deism, theism, polytheism, they all have a necessary thing that exists. They're just not all gods because God has a mind and this one doesn't have a mind.
I got you. Being honest, you're the first atheist I've ever talked to that's said that. So
Yeah, it's because I spend a
that's
lot
why I
of
was. That's
time.
why I was like, sounds like gods, but just not same God.
Yeah,
But
most atheists just call it nature because they hate the word God. They have lots of bad experiences. And so, because I spend a lot of time and a lot of friends who are mine who are theists, I try to make the language of the atheist worldview as understandable to the theist as possible. And so, yeah, you can say the universe is a god. That's called pantheism. Pantheism is where the universe is a god. So, yeah, I try to incorporate as much religious language so it makes sense to people as much as possible. So, I'm happy to say, yes, universe is God. Yes.
got it. That's pretty interesting. I am going to do a little bit of studying probably tonight on things we were talking about.
Yeah. Do a little more time because there's one more topic. You mentioned
Sure.
morality was
Go
the
ahead.
last argument. So, morality. I definitely see the Old Testament God as immoral because I have a model of objective morality. My
Okay.
morality is we look at our moral intuitions. It's the phenomenon we observe that there is this thing we call morality. We try to find a pattern in that thing, and we
Mhm.
describe that pattern with a principle, which is any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And then we say that that pattern, that principle is described by some law of nature. And if we think that this is correct, then like the world flood, drowning millions of babies in the global flood or whatever, or destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, or turning people to salt, causing wars, all of those things seem to be something immoral that the God has done. By my model objective morality would say the God is immoral. So why do you think that those things are not immoral in the Christian worldview?
So we'll take one of those, the flood. Now, if you were to ask me why did God use a flood to destroy the world instead of just vanquishing them out of reality, I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us why he used a flood.
That's the Pine Creek thing,
I'm just
right?
going to be honest. I had no clue why he just didn't vanquish them off. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm not God. Um, do I think it was immoral for him to do this? No, because if God is who he says he is, the Bible says that God searched the world and not one was righteous. Noah and his family were the only ones that he had found to be righteous. The rest of the people were off. They were sacrificing their babies. They were raping people. They were incesting. They were having sex with animals. Pretty much almost everything that's going on in today's world. It's kind of scary. But so none were righteous. Now, I understand you're saying, like, wow, but everybody, I mean, once again, I'm not God, but if God is who he says he is, he said nobody was found righteous. So that comes to the point of, would would we find rapists, murderers, people that sacrifice babies, people that are having sex with animals, would we find them to be righteous? Probably not. So, since he is the creator of the world, and if God is who he says he is, and you've probably heard this before, but I like it. I think it's the best way to say it is, if if God is who he says he is, and if you are a Christian, then God actually don't kill anybody. He just changes their location. He either moves you out of his presence or keeps you in his presence. He's just moving you. So it's not as if, to me, it's like he can murder. He can't murder his own creation. He can change our location, but he can't murder us. And so if God is who he says he is, then no, he said nobody was righteous. So I don't think him killing the entire population would be something that was bad.
Okay, so from my perspective, like if we think about a doctor in the 1800s, if you got shot in the leg and there's a doctor, the only way he can heal you is to cut your leg off. No other way to save you. If he's
Right.
gonna like hacksaw your leg off, but if a doctor did that today, they would be evil because they could just give you antibiotics. They could do a much less painful method to get the same goal, right? So
Right.
if a god could use a less painful, evil method, but chooses not to, then he would be like the doctor today, choosing to cut your leg off instead of giving you antibiotics. That would just be evil. So to me, it seems like because God is all powerful, the fact that he chose to drown people, which is extremely painful, and they didn't consent to it, that seems very evil because he could have done something much less bad. Like he could have cured them. He could have just teleported each person to their own planet where they couldn't harm other people. He could have teleported them to heaven, poofed them out of existence, like you said. There's essentially like infinitely many things he could have done that would have been more like giving people a shot rather than drowning them and causing them painful deaths. So the fact that he chose to kill people when he could have just mercilessly or cured them of pain or given them their own world, or like in my model, a perfect moral world is a one where it's impossible for any person to force any other person to do something they don't consent to. He could have added that in as a law of physics, and that would have been the morally perfect world. And so because God, instead of like making the morally perfect world where it's impossible to force people to do things they don't consent to, he just decided to drown everybody. That seems very immoral by comparison, just like the doctor, a today doctor who chose to cut your leg off when he could have just given you antibiotics.
Well, I agree. Like, I mean, there was a a priest, I believe it was, over 500 years ago. He said something, and it just rings true to me, even like in this situation we're talking about now. He said, if God was to give me his power for 24 hours, you would see the differences I would make in the world. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are. Because if God is all powerful and he is all wisdom, what he did and why he did it was for a purpose. Now, do I know that purpose? No, I'm not God. If I knew that purpose, then I'd probably be God. but I don't know that purpose. And so I can't sit there and say the way he did it was wrong. And it's, if God is who he says he is, and he is our heavenly father, our main creator, our father, then who am I to sit there and tell him the way he disciplined his children is wrong, when I don't want law enforcement or other people to come to me and say, you can't discipline your kid that way. Well, it's my kid. If I want to, if I choose to spank them for, not eating their food, and then only grounding them for sneaking out in the middle of the night, you know, I mean, that's my choice. Those are my choices. Those are my kids. And if God is who he says he is, then, it's his choice on when we live, when we die. He chooses that. And so, no, I don't see it as immoral, because, like I said, he said it was none was righteous, and he had a purpose. Like if you ask me, would I have done it differently? Of course, I would have done it differently. I just would have vanquished them, gone. But I probably wouldn't have got the same effects as he got. And I'm sure you've heard people say it, the ripple effect. I'm sure there was a ripple effect from him creating a flood, that he got the results he needed from this happening. Now, what those are, I don't know. We can see small ripple effects. If me and my wife make love and 9 months later we had a baby, there's a ripple effect. We knew what was going to happen 9 months later. And so we can see small ripple effects, but as far as long-term ripple effects, we can't. We can't see that. Only God can see that, because he's all-knowing.
Yeah, yeah. I can
So
understand your
yes, I
argument.
do. That's, to me, that's atheist, and I'm just being honest. To me, the flood itself is the biggest argument for morality and immorality when it comes to the Bible. The rest of it, I believe, is easily justified for me. But the
Well,
flood itself,
quick
no.
question.
Sure.
The part where God sent two bears to kill 40 children for making fun of a bald guy. I mean, maybe you think that's perfectly normal because you're bald. But
I am bald. I wasn't always bald, though.
But I mean, I think that's typically a really good challenge, also, because God sent bears to kill 40 kids for making fun of a bald. I think that's a little extreme. Making fun of a bald guy does not deserve mass bear mauling.
Right. And honestly, I don't know the exact uh, scripture you're talking about. I really don't. I mean, I know a lot of the Bible. I don't know that one. But, um, I mean, I'd have to do some research into it to give you even a halfway decent answer into that, because I don't know.
That's fair. Yeah,
What I
it's
do know
Second
is that there's a
Kings Second Kings 2:24. You can look it up later if you want. But yes, perfectly reasonable answer.
what I do know is that Greg Kokel.
Yes, I've met him.
Have you?
Yep. So
I
he
heard
comes
I
he
heard he's
comes
a really
to
nice guy.
he comes to Minneapolis once a year for the Rethink Apologetics conference. So I meet him and all of the different Stand to Reason guys. They come up here. John and Tim and I forgot the lady's name who runs their show. But yeah, I meet him.
He has a. Did you ever read his book?
Which one? Tactics?
No, or maybe it's not Greg Kokel. Who am I thinking of? Um, I'm trying to type it in here. I can't think today.
What's the name of his book?
Oh, Paul Copan.
Yes, Paul Copan.
Paul
I had him on my channel. We had
Yes.
a debate on my channel.
Oh, really? Okay, so yeah, like I think a lot of those answers, which honestly I did read the book, is God a Moral Monster. I don't know if you did, but
Yeah,
no, I didn't. I didn't even see the one where you're talking about with the bears killing the 40 children. So I mean, I'm not going to sit there and go either way, because, like I said, I don't remember reading that. I'm sure it's in there. I mean, obviously, you're not going to lie to me. I'm sure it's in there, but
there was
I've
that time
never.
that God said you should give all of your money to TJump. Second Kings 2:500. Yes.
Yeah, the Old Testament. I will say this: the Old Testament is something that we don't live by anymore. That is what I do know for a fact. Is we don't live by the Old Testament, and a lot of the things in the Bible is a lot of it's prescription and a lot of it's a description. A lot of it's for us to way to live now, and a lot of it's just to tell us how things were. And like I hear people talking all the time. They're like, well, how come in the Old Testament God said, the Israelites couldn't eat pigs, they couldn't eat this, they had to wear clothes out of certain threads, and I told him, I was like, well, I can give you basic answers. I can tell you that, I'm not God's, but I can tell you that, for one, maybe he was just trying to keep the Israelites separated from everyone else, so everybody knew that they were different, that those were God's chosen people. That, like, hey, why are these people just different? Why do these people don't eat this? Why do these people act this way? Oh, it's because of their God, And then of course maybe people want to be like, well, tell us about your God. And I was like, and then at the same time, I'm like, back then they didn't have refrigeration and a lot of things that we have nowadays. So maybe God's like, don't eat that pig, you're gonna get sick. Don't eat that thing. So I mean,
Yeah. From my perspective, it seems that a perfect moral world, like God could have created a perfect moral world if he did one thing differently, which is add one extra law of physics, which is it's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. That would end rape, murder, theft, larceny, everything that is we think of as a sin would just be gone. It would just be impossible because you just have to add one law. It's impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. That's it. And it seems like that's such an easy, mundane thing to do that it's hard for me to imagine there is such a perfect being who could have missed that. Like that seems like no matter what possible reason God may have, you can make it better by doing one thing. Give everyone the option. Do you want to be a part of my world with all of the suffering and death and murder and rape? Or would you like to be a part of this other world where everything is consensual? If you just gave everyone that option, everything it would be perfectly moral. Like everything would be fine. And so it seems like forcing people to live in this world without their consent, with all of the death and rape, is like the doctor cutting a person's leg off to cure them of the bacteria, when all he really had to do was give them a shot, and the shot in this case is consent. It's just, would you like to be a part of this world, or would you choose to not? And so, for me,
well,
because go ahead.
a couple of things with that is what I like to say is this is so like how you were saying that God give people a choice. Do you want to live here? Or do you not want to live here? Okay, so here's the way I see it is if my son's 25, but let's say he's a teenager. We'll pretend. So mentally he probably is. So
burn.
So if, for instance, I said, you're going on the boat this weekend with me and mom, you don't have a choice, you're coming. And he comes on the boat, and then the boat starts sinking, and we're all drowning. And he says, a fishing boat pulls up and says, hey, I'm here to save you. And he says, nope, I'm staying on this because I didn't choose to be here. I didn't have a choice. I'm going down with the boat. To me, that's the same thing as what you're saying, because God's saying, I've sent you a boat. I've sent you Jesus. There is a way out. There's a way to save yourself. And then, people are like, well, I didn't choose to be here. Okay, well, you didn't have to choose to be here, but you're here. So do you want to be saved or do you not? And then as far as what you were talking about with that one little simple thing, do I think it's logically possible? Yes. Do I think it's logically achievable? No. Not in a world where you're going to have a creation that has free will. Free will. I mean, like you said, that one little law that says don't hurt people. Well, if your laws of morality are right, then why aren't those laws there? They are there. They do tell us not to hurt people. They do tell us not to rape. But if God was to prevent them from doing that, then he's stopping free will. And the only way we can have, like true love and happiness and joy is by having free will. We got to, because, well, the only way to have love is to freely give it, to freely accept it. And so if you're going to could God create a world where there was no evil? Absolutely. But we'd all be like a bunch of robots. We'd all be a bunch of, walking around and just doing exactly what we're told to do by these laws that God has given us that we can't do and can do. But God wanted a free world. He wanted a world where there was moral laws, and he wanted a morality world. And the only way to achieve that is by having a free creation, because God himself wanted to be loved, but he wants to be loved freely. He doesn't want it to be forced.
Oh yeah, so but you can have free will in this world I'm describing. Like, can you fly? Can you jump up and fly right now?
I wish I would
Well,
not be here.
does that stop you from having free will? Does the fact that you can't fly stop you from having free will?
Well, no, but that's not a moral issue.
Well, right. So the fact that free will is really the desiring part. Like if it was physically impossible to kill somebody, like Stephen Hawking is a paraplegic. He can't actually stab anybody, but he still has free will,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So the fact that he's physically incapable of harming anybody doesn't prevent him from having free will. So if we
Well,
added,
he's physically incapable, but I'm sure mentally he's wanted to many
yeah,
times. He just couldn't physically do it.
exactly. So if we
Well,
added an extra law of physics that it was physically impossible to kill people or to force them to do things they don't consent to, you could still have free will. You could still have the desire to harm people. You'd still have the free will. You'd still have the morality. You'd still have all of the love. But the extra law of physics would just be like you can't fly, just like you can't fly. You can't stab someone in the face. That would just be it's not physically possible. You can still feel it. You can still desire
but
it.
how could you stop someone from doing that, but yet still have them have free will? I understand your analogies you're using, but to me they don't work in this scenario, because how are you going to have, say, free will, but then sit there and say it's impossible for you to stab someone? How
Well,
would that be impossible?
there's lots of ways.
The
Like
only way that would be impossible is that that person was just incapable of dying.
that would be one way
Like
to
you
do
could,
it. But
but see, if you did that, then God didn't want to create a world where we never went back home. Which, if God is true, that's heaven. So He wanted a world where we could go back home,
well,
and
that
so He
that's
can't do two things at once.
well, that's one of the ways to do it. Another way would be give everyone a personal force field. If you have a personal force field and someone tries to stab you, it's just going to hit the force field, not going to do anything. Another
But
way
then
would be
how would you make love? How would you have
turn off
affection?
turn off the force field. Like you can turn it on and off. You can be like, for people who are trying
Well,
to stab
true.
me,
But how many times do husbands kill wives or wives kill husbands? I mean, you wouldn't be wearing your force field when you're at home with your wife, just chilling.
have you seen the new Dune movie?
No.
So they have force fields. The way they work is velocity. If an object of X velocity comes at you, it stops it. So if you could still make love because it's not a high velocity, and if someone tries to stab you, it wouldn't work because the force field would stop the knife because it's a high velocity weapon.
You do realize that's a movie.
Yes, but it is this is
That's not a possibility. That would be saying, like you were talking about earlier, like a married bachelor. Like, you can't create that. Because even if exactly what you said existed, what would stop me from putting my hands around someone's neck that had their force field down and just strangling them?
force. So if there's too much force, it would be like velocity. Too much force or too much velocity, it would stop. The force field would activate, and this is actually possible. There is actually things that are very similar that are already in existence. Yeah, we can do that.
Force fields
Well, force fields
around human beings.
force fields definitely exist, and conditional force fields definitely exist. And if we once we get enough technology, we can definitely put them around humans. Yeah. So this all of this is realistically possible and will exist in the next 100 years, most likely. So humans themselves will be able to and will create such a world that it's impossible to force people to do things they don't consent to. Like we humans are going to do it. That's another part of my argument is that you can't say this is impossible because humans are going to do it, and because humans are going to do it, God must also necessarily be able to do it.
I don't believe that will ever exist. Like, there's no way to stop crime. It's just impossible. You're not going to be able to stop crime. You're not going to be able to stop um, murder. Like, you can do a lot of things to help prevent it, but you'll never be able to stop it.
So if we were able to stop it, would that stop you from being a Christian? Because that would prove that
No,
morally.
because you're still going to have evil, because the thoughts will still exist.
Okay. Okay. So let's say
Just because the physical act doesn't happen doesn't mean the thought wasn't there.
Okay. So let's say we stopped all of the physical acts. You still have the thoughts. You still have the thoughts. You still have the free will.
But what about theft, bank robberies,
Also stopped.
car theft?
Stopped. All
How will that
all
all stop?
same kind of
See, because now
force.
we're getting into like a sci-fi world. Like we're saying that we're going to live in a world where there's no crime.
Yeah, that's going to necessarily happen in the future when we gain technology. It's not really sci-fi, and it's something that's pretty easily possible in lots of different ways. But the point here is that we humans can do this. So God definitely could have done this. God is an all-powerful being. He could have made this from the beginning, where you still have free will, you still have evil, you still have sin, but it's physically impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to. So it seems like because that's a possibility that we can do, we're going to do this. So God could have done it. The fact that he didn't, the fact that he made us in this world seems very, very evil.
I don't think that is a world that we will ever exist in. I don't think that will happen.
What if it does? Does that mean that I'm right and that God is evil?
No, because the thoughts would still be there. But I don't think that'll be a world that would ever actually exist. Like, don't get me wrong,
Why?
that sounds like a great world. I'd love to live there, but I don't think it'll ever exist because the minute you find someone that creates, let's say, in what you were just saying, let's just go off of what you were saying, but there's a force field around every single human being. There's going to be somebody out there that learns how to break into one. You know what I mean? For every time there's something good that comes out, there's something bad that follows it. Just like, like, oh, we're going to come up with internet. Well, then, of course, bad things follow it. Oh, and then we come up with credit cards. This is a good thing. People can't steal your cash. Oh, but now they can steal your PIN number. Oh, let's come out with the chip inside the credit card. That'll save us. And no, it doesn't. People breaking into that. So I mean, for every good thing that happens, something bad is going to come with it. So that's why I say I don't think it'll ever be possible. No, I think like because I've never studied or researched what you've looked into, so I can't say what you're saying is true or false. But let's say it is true, and they come out with these force fields. Well, sooner or later, somebody's going to come out with a way to break into it. So it's going to be impossible. It'd be almost pointless to even make it. Like honestly, like to this, we're to the point now where it's almost pointless for them to have these microchips inside our credit cards. Like, what was the point of that? Like I don't know if you use them a lot, but I use them every day, 100 times a day. It feels like, especially around Christmas. I mean, I still got to put in my PIN code. People can still know my PIN code. So what was the point of this chip? And they're like, oh, it's safer. How is that safer? People are already stealing it. And then they're like, oh, let's come up with a credit card that we can use Wi-Fi and touch. Oh, now we got people walking around with little things that can read your card in your pocket. So for every good thing that happens, something bad's going to come with it. So I
Um,
don't think that's why I say I don't think it'll be a world that will actually ever happen.
well, so if I look at the pattern of human history, the rate of murder, rape, violence has been going down drastically. It's dropping. It's going way, way, way down. And it seems like it's going to continue to go down. And eventually we're going to get artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is going to run these force fields, not humans. So there's no human that's going to be able to break an artificial intelligence force field. And if I'm right about morality, we're going to be able to
Hey,
program what?
Vicky, iRobot, Vicky,
I
she
robot.
did.
Yep, yep,
Yep,
yep.
Vicky.
That was a good show. I
Don't
like
forget
that.
about Vicky.
I like that show. But yeah, so
That's a
so
great show.
I think that we're going to get artificial intelligence and it's going to program these things and protect us in this way. And so we will live in this world. Like, and the pattern of history seems to show that. Like when you said it's pointless to invent all these new chip things. I don't think so, because it seems like with each new invention, the amount of people who can take advantage of it goes down. With each new invention, there's less crime, there's less murder, there's less rape, there's less stealing. So we're getting closer and closer to this world as we speak. And once we get to the point of this really highly advanced AI, we will essentially be able to decrease it to zero. So this seems like a really reasonable world that we're going to get to pretty soon, relatively speaking. So why would you say that it was pointless? Like, don't you see that as we make these increases, crime goes down, murder goes down, the world seems to be getting better. We're in the most peaceful time in human history. Like, it seems like we're making a lot of progress here.
Let's see here. Trying to pull this up real quick. Close. So according to this newsletter, It's just saying that since the 90s, overall crime rate has declined, but murder has gone up 15% in the last 21st century. But it's saying the crime rate has gone down, but murder has gone up. And it's mainly because of talking about how all the mass shootings and yada, yada, yada. And I'm sure we can look up different articles and we'll get different things. People are going to say different, whatever they want to say.
Well, I'm
But this one gives a graph. This one says like in the 60s, there was less than 10,000 people murdered and this is just in the U.S. And then in 1990, we were up to over 20 something thousand. Looks like probably in closer to 30,000.
So it seems like a decrease. So murders have gone down by 50% since the 1990s.
Right. Well, it says I'm going to show according to this chart that I'm looking at. In the 90s, it looks like it was up and around the 30,000 mark.
Yeah.
And then it went in around 2015, it jumped below 15,000.
Right.
But now we're back up to over 20,000. So it went down, but now it's on its way back up.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean,
well, it seems to me like
it's just going to get more and more violent.
Well, like any pattern, you have like dips, and goes up and down like a zigzag line. It's not like a straight line.
Right.
So it seems to me like the pattern is that it's going down, and there's of course there's increases, especially with like COVID, when there's huge economic crises or whatever. There's always going to be increases, but the pattern seems to be like it's going down. Like it's dropped 50%.
That would be great. Murder, that'd be great if murder's going down. I know in our little town, murder seems to be going crazy here lately. But like I said, I don't think there'll ever be a world where everybody's going to be walking around in a force field. I just don't see that happening.
We will get Star Trek. Star Trek will be real.
I don't see. You know, people get mad at me all the time. I've never seen Star Trek and I've never seen Star Wars, ever. I've never seen E.T. Can you believe that? Who hasn't seen E.T.? I've never seen E.T.
I was kind of bored with that one, but I would definitely suggest Star Trek and Star Wars for sure.
I did watch the new Star Trek.
The Discovery or the one with the movies?
Chris Pine?
Yeah.
I did like those. Those were funny. I watched both of those. I liked those.
Yeah, I agree.
But the other ones, like I love William Shatner. But the other ones, they were so fake looking. It's like I can't pull myself to watch it. I think that's the thing with ET too. It's like it looks like a football, like a painted football on a stick, and I can't get into it.
Yeah, those guys in the 1960s and their technology, like they didn't do technology. It's so boring.
Yeah, like not compared to nowadays.
Yeah.
What's funny though is like I watch a lot of movies I watched back when I was younger. And like I watch it now and I'm like, that was so horribly fake. Like I don't understand how I even thought that was real.
Yep. Our standards have increased as time goes on.
I tell you what's getting ridiculous is all the Fast and the Furious.
What are we on, like 37 now?
I don't know, but I completely stopped watching them when the one episode, and I'm not saying the other ones weren't completely ridiculous, but there's like, okay, that's maybe achievable. But when he stood on his door and hit the wall to some bridge and jumped midair and caught the girl in midair, just falling out of a car and landed, and they were just like, ow, that hurt. I was like, okay.
Yeah, a little like, over the top.
But see, now I love my Marvel movies. Because I tell people, I'm like, well, that's different though. I'm like, because I'm not expecting it to be realistic. I'm expecting Thor and the Incredible Hulk. But if I'm watching Fast and the Furious, these aren't superheroes. These are supposed to be realistic things that can happen, which they don't.
Yeah, I totally understand. But yeah, it's we've been going on for several hours now. It's been great talking to you. Really enjoyed our conversation. Would you like to give everyone where they can find you on social media and YouTube and stuff again, and give any like concluding remarks or whatever?
Yeah, so you basically can find me on I'm on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, and we're on pretty much any kind of podcasting network out there. It's all under the same name, The Christian Apologist. And basically we're just out to try to find truth. We're not out to demean. We're not out to make people feel a certain way. I'm not attacking atheists. Like I like to learn from atheists. I learned a lot from you today. Learn some things I need to study up on that I've never even heard of. So this is going to be interesting for me for the next week or two. And it's just about pursuing truth and whatever that truth is. And that's basically all we're about, is just trying to get people to follow the truth and not listen to the scientists, but actually follow the scientist evidence and follow the evidence yourself and see where it leads. And I got a book coming out. Hopefully it'll be out in about 3 or 4 months. It's called Stand for God. And hopefully I can meet up with you sometime and do some of your conferences.
Absolutely.